Hello, and welcome to this, our 120th live stream. What are you going to do with your question? This is, of course, a reference to our Monday video, which is what are you going to do with your PhD? A video that talks about one of the most common questions that are done in PhD interviews. So, we have a little bit of housekeeping. We are happy to announce that we are currently working on another popcorn video. So I know that there are those out there for whom the art of Canly still has its admirers. So we've got a popcorn review in the works. So we hope you enjoy it when it comes out in a couple weeks. And it will be like always. If you know what the popcorn reviews are, you know what to expect already. But we're still not going to tell you what it is until the kernels are popped. So, with that said, we're going to start getting into the questions here. Now, the rules are the same as always. Super chats have priority. That should come as a surprise to no one. We do take non-super chat questions though, and for those we ask that you put a Q and a colon in front of your question so I know it's directed at me and not to somebody else in the live chat. Only post your question once. Very important rule. You post it multiple times, we'll just ignore it, pretend it didn't exist, just because it throws me off as I go scanning through the live chat. And also, if it has to do with something in the Bible or a foreign word or a Bible contradiction, give me some context. In the case of a Bible verse, do specify the book, chapter, and verse. Okay? So I can figure out what's going on. All right? And then finally, just a reminder to everyone on the live stream, you know, do keep the live chat respectful, kind, and productive, okay? So we have had a few violations of that in recent times, but we just ask that everyone just keep it kind of respectful, okay? So, with that said, let's get into the questions. All right, we're going to start the night off with a few non-super chats. And the first one here is from Darkblade. And he's asking a question about the Egyptian language. Is the pair of diagonal strokes, Gardner sign list Z4, a hieratic shorthand for the double relief like the spiral for the quail chick? Yes, it is. It is very much essentially a hieratic shortcut for the double relief. And it's the letter Y, essentially. Oddly enough, it's only used with the double relief, not the single relief. So you don't find a single stroke substituting a single relief, but you do find the double diagonal strokes substituting the double relief. So the double relief is actually a different character than the single one. So it's not two eyes put together. It's actually its own character. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Very interesting. I always love grammar questions. So for me, these always make my day because I'm at heart I'm a real grammar geek. So so I love this stuff. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, our second non-super chat here is from Chow Yi. Is there any evidence that black skin was used to describe leprosy in the ancient Near East as the Mormons now claim? No, none. In fact, every description we have for leprosy in the ancient Near East is a patch of white skin. And when, for example, Moses sticks his hand in his tunic and pulls it out, and it's said to be white as leprous, white as snow. That's the common description of leprosy, that it's patches of white skin. Okay? So this is not something you're going to find in the ancient Near East. They never described it as black skin. So I know what the Mormons are trying to do here. They're trying to sort of weasel their way out of a racist history, but they're not going to be able to do that here using the history of leprosy to do it. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. The question. And I hope that helped. The third non-super chat here is going to be from Warrior of the Most High. And he asks an interesting question. Was John the Baptist Elijah's reincarnation? The question sort of comes up from my Hindu background. Okay. Now, there's one verse that has led some people to believe this. Okay. We'll pull that up just to get some clarity here. And that is Matthew. Matthew 11:14. Okay. We'll start at verse 16. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if you care to accept it, he himself is Elijah who was to come. He who has an ear, let him hear. Okay. Now, what's going to happen here is some people are going to take this out of the context of the Gospels. And they're going to say, okay, John the Baptist was really a reincarnation of Elijah. But there are other verses here to consider that. And shortly after this, John the Baptist dies. Okay? Then you go to Matthew 17. Okay, so later on in the gospel. Okay? And the disciples start asking Christ, okay, why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Well, okay, the Son of Man comes, and then they're still expecting Elijah. They know by chapter 17 that John the Baptist wasn't Elijah. Because Elijah is supposed to set things straight. That didn't happen. So then what's going on? Well, okay, let's consider one other verse, and then we'll hop back to Matthew 11. So, in case it wasn't clear already, we go to John chapter 1, verse 21. When the Jews start asking John the Baptist, and verse 21, and they asked him, what then? Are you Elijah? And he said, I am not. Are you the prophet? And he answered, no. Okay. So, we've got here a flat-out denial by John the Baptist that he's Elijah. So, what are we then to make of Matthew 11? Pop that back to Matthew 11. If I can without mucking it up too badly. Matthew 11. Okay, and verse 14. Now, what we have here in the Greek is what's called an anarthrous construction. That means it does not have a definite article. Now, names are normally anarthrous. You don't usually use an article with the name. Okay? So, and in Greek, the indefinite article is never used with a name. So, but it could still be a possible reading here. So what Jesus is implying here is, if you care to accept it. Now, he's not, if he's claiming that John the Baptist is Elijah, he'd just come out and say, he is Elijah come back. Doesn't quite say that. He says, if you care to accept it, he means this is going to be a hard saying. This is a hard saying. So that's, if you hear that, if you care to accept that, that means he's going to give you something difficult. He himself is an Elijah. What Christ is doing here is using a typology. Who was to come. He who has ears, let him hear. Okay, so he's not saying in this passage that John the Baptist is Elijah, but he's saying he's a type of Elijah. So that's how the passage is reconciled. It's not reincarnation, and John the Baptist is not Elijah come back from the dead or from heaven. But what he is he is a type of Elijah who is sort of preceding Christ to come. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. Great question, and I hope that helps. I also want to take a moment here to thank some of the people who have also uh, given us some donations prior to the start of the stream. I want to thank Talbot Slade, who gave us 250 prior to the live stream tonight, and I also want to thank Jack Ray, who gave us $30. And I also want to thank a couple of the people who have renewed their memberships, such as N. Japonis Con Rafe, who renewed his Seth membership, and MC, who became one of our few Thoth members. Thank you very much, so very much for supporting this channel. We really appreciate it. Okay, we're going to take one more non-super chat, and then we're going to get to the super chats, as they look like they are coming up here fast. Okay, we'll take this one from Bonbon, and he asks, why does the document of the Ipawer papyrus trace back to the 19th dynasty if the text is from the 12th dynasty? Called a copy, essentially. Why did they replicate the text right during the 19th dynasty when Exodus happened? Well, we find a lot of copies of prophetic literature during the Ramesside period. It's very strange. We find sort of what's called the Middle Kingdom prophetic texts. These are texts such as Neferti, Ipawer, and others that sort of happen in the New Kingdom in two sort of hot spots. The first hot spot is at the beginning of the New Kingdom during the reign of Ahmose I, where Ahmose is seen as the great liberator against the Semites. But the second sort of set of copies, and by far the largest number of them, happens during the Ramesside period, during the reign of Ramses II, right in that sort of mid-19th dynasty. So I think some of the reason why we find so many copies of these texts at that period of time is that essentially they're having similar problems to what was going on during, say, the first intermediate period, where there was a large number of Semitic people who had occupied the Nile Delta. Plus, you started getting these hypernatural events, which would, in the Bible, are called plagues. So I think that somehow the native Egyptian had to reconcile this in some way that made sense to them. So what they did was they went to the only literature they had, which was these prophetic texts from the Middle Kingdom, which describes these events, such as the sun going dark, the river turning to blood, violence in the land, Semites crawling all over the place like vermin, you know, and they're not vermin, but, you know, that's sort of the Egyptian view of this, okay? So there's a lot that's going on there. Now, one of the things, and I saw your follow-up question, Bonbon, so can we still use Ipawer to argue for the Exodus? Only insofar as it's describing events, hypernatural events, that happened during the first intermediate period that also reoccurred during the mid-19th dynasty. So, in that respect, we can just say, okay, the plays we find in the book of Exodus aren't unusual, I should say, aren't heard of. They've happened before in Egypt's history. So in that respect, we can use Ipawer to say, hey, okay, you know, we don't see this often happening today, but there was a time before the Exodus when it happened also. So actually that does give credibility to the Exodus account. So yeah, I think there's definitely it's an indirect evidence for the Exodus because it shows that these things happened previously. Okay. So with that said, I want to make it very, very clear, though, that the Ipawer papyrus is not directly recording the Exodus, because there's things recorded in the Ipawer papyrus that did not happen in New Kingdom Egypt, such as the building of pyramids. That's all Middle Kingdom. So, there's going to be those sorts of items in Ipawer that we just have to be cognizant of. So it is definitely a 12th dynasty papyrus. There's really no doubt about that. And it's probably late 12th dynasty too. So, but I think that's as late. That's the sweet spot for that papyrus is late 12th dynasty. So anyway, thank you very much for the non-super chat. I hope that helped, and very much appreciate the question. Okay, now we're on to our super chats. Our first super chat was from Asin Weir for $4.99. Please keep me in your prayers. My guinea pig passed away on Wednesday. I'm sorry to hear that. We never mock someone's loss of a pet. Okay? We've been through it ourselves, not with guinea pigs, but with bunnies. And it's a terrible day. It's a terrible day. So we'll definitely keep you in our prayers. Thank you for letting us know, and I'm sorry it happened. Okay? They're sweet little animals. Okay. That's our first super chat. Our next one here is from Japonis Conrafe for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he goes, proponents of the documentary hypothesis, which is not, use Genesis 12:6 and 13:17 to say authors seem to be recalling people who no longer lived in those areas at a time of writing, objecting Mosaic authorship. Thoughts? There's a couple things about those particular passages that sort of strike me as odd anyway. Let's start with actually Genesis 13:7. I think there's an oddity to those that just sort of stood out to me. The Bible here. Okay. Now, I'll start at verse 6. And the land could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. This is talking about Lot and Abraham's herds. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling in the land. Then Abraham said to Lot, please let there be no more strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Okay. The text issue here is now the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling then in the land. Okay. Now, one of the things that really struck me as odd about this was as you're reading the passage, you get a fairly straightforward narrative. I mean, a really straightforward narrative. You got Lot, you got Abraham, they're living together, they're herding the herds, and they're having some strife. And then, oh, by the way, the Canaanite and Perizzite were still living in the land at the time. Oh, and then we get back to Abraham said to Lot. This really strikes me as a scribal gloss. It's not marked in my text as a scribal gloss, but boy, it sure looks like a scribal gloss. A piece of explanatory text that was inserted here between what would be a basic flow of narrative. So it's just like inserted here for, well, why is that here? Why are we being reminded of this at this point? It does not make a lot of sense to the narrative. Because the narrative is really talking about Abraham and Lot. And all of a sudden, there's this narrative. Well, that's because they're going to, you get down to verse 10, And Lot has his eyes on Sodom and Gomorrah. So what strikes me about verse 13:7 is that there's a scribal gloss that's been inserted here that's not original to the text to remind the reader who's reading at a later date that, hey, you know, that land was also full of Canaanites and parasites once upon a time. So that's what's sort of striking me as what's going on in this particular passage, and it's really obvious. It's really obvious. You don't really need. This one's easy to figure out, honestly. So, so that's what I would say about Genesis 13, verse 7. Now, in the case of 12, verse 6, it's something very similar. Starting at verse 5, and Abraham took Sarai his wife, and Lot his nephew, and all the possessions which they had accumulated, and the persons which they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. Thus they came to the land of Canaan. And Abraham passed through the land as far as Shechem to the oak of Mamre. Now the Canaanite was then in the land. Again, why do you need to introduce that here? And the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your descendants I will give this land. Okay. Yeah, okay. You didn't actually need that gloss there to actually make sense of the text. The text would still make sense without that gloss. It's not like it's adding a huge amount of detail, because Abraham's hanging out with Amorites already, you know, at Mamre. So, you know, it's not a necessary gloss, but it does seem to be one that has been, again, added to the text. And we do see this from time to time where scribal glosses are added to help the reader. Now, okay. Would God get... Bonbon asks a follow-up question here. Would God get angry if scribes did this? That would be very hard to say, because that would be like reading the mind of God. I don't think you could say one way or the other if God would be angry or not. Now, we have to understand that at the time there was no prohibition. When the Pentateuch was written, there was no prohibition to adding scribal glosses. It wasn't forbidden at the time. It was never a good idea, but it wasn't forbidden either. I don't think it's part of the original word. Okay, so I do think scribal glosses are not part of the inspired text. But, you know, I tend to shy away from scribal glosses as being part of the inspired text. Oftentimes they just add things that are just blatantly wrong. So I don't tend to see them as part of the original text. I don't think that it implies that the original text was incomplete. I just don't think it's part of the inspired text. I mean, I think the part of the inspired text is actually the message anyway, not the wording. So if a scribe comes in and changes the wording here and there slightly, you know, that's neither here nor there for me. But when you start adding messages to it and changing the message, okay, then I think that there's a problem there. That doesn't mean that the text is unreliable. It just means we have to show more discernment as we read it. Okay? So, anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you, and Japonis Conrafe, for that super chat. We really appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Okay. Next super chat here is from 501 Mobius for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. In 1 Samuel 14:18, Saul says to Ahijah to bring the ark to him. In 1 Samuel 14:19, he says, withdraw your hand. What does that mean? We don't hear about the ark until 2 Samuel 6:2, when David sends for it. Okay, let's bring up this passage. This is actually really interesting what this is. Pull up our Bible here. I'm going to go to 1 Samuel 14. Go down. And this is one of the wars between Saul and the Philistines. So that's sort of the context that's going on here. Let's get to the... Oh. $14. Okay. Now, verse 17. Saul said to the people who are with them, number now and see who has gone from us. Okay, do a head count. Do a roll call. And when they had numbered, behold, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. Then Saul said to Ahijah, who is basically the high priest, bring the ark of God here, for the ark of God was with him at the time, with the sons of Israel. And it happened while Saul talked to the priest that the commotion in the camp continued and increased, and Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand. Okay. Is that all we want to read here? Don't have any more. Okay. Now, one of the things about Ahijah that he's the high priest. Okay? He's the high priest. He's wearing the ephod. Okay? He's wearing the ephod. Within the ephod are the Urim and Thummim. So what's happened is Saul's asked the high priest to bring out the Ark of the Covenant and start rolling the Urim and Thummim. So he's asking Saul is asking the high priest to get a word from the Lord. What to do next. So, Ahijah is there rolling his dragon dice, not getting any messages. And Saul suddenly hears a commotion in the camp of the Philistines. They're starting to kill each other down there. And Saul says to the high priest, okay, you can put the dice away. You can put the Urim and Thummim away. We've got our answer. We've got our answer. The Philistines are killing each other. Now we're going to go kill them as well. So that's what withdraw your hand means. It means you can put the Urim and Thummim away. There's no need to consult them anymore because God has already spoken. So that's essentially what's going on here, is that Saul's asking the high priest to get a word from God using the Urim and Thummim, and not getting an answer, oh, I hear them killing each other. Okay, we got our answer. You can put it away now. So anyway, that's what's going on here. I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, the next one here is from Japonis Conrafe here for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. John 14:3, when Jesus says, I come again, does he refer to his resurrection? Because if it was his second coming, it would sound like if you die, you won't go right away to where I am until I return first. Okay, it doesn't quite mean that, but it does mean something very interesting. So let's bring up the passage. John chapter 14. And we'll start here. Verse 1. Okay. Christ is speaking here to the apostles. Let not your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe in me also. In my Father's house are many dwellings. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go and prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, and I will receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. All right. This is actually talking about the second coming. Now, this is not talking about absence from the bodies to be present with the Lord. It's not talking about that. It's talking about something a little different, which is the great wedding feast of the Lamb. This is actually marital imagery. Okay. When a marriage was arranged in ancient Israel, there was essentially an engagement. At that point, it's pretty much a done deal. Okay? But the son of, the future groom, he had to go out and build a house for the family. And he doesn't get to collect his bride until that house is done. So the groom goes and he builds a house. And then he comes back and he collects his bride, and they go off to the house in marital bliss after spending one night in the bride's house. Okay, in the bride's parents' home. Okay, there's something behind that, but we won't get into that. So, what Christ is using here is marital imagery. He's using here the great wedding feast of the Lamb. So that's what he's referring to here. Okay? So that's what's going on, which is he's going to build that house, and then he's going to come and collect his bride. And this is, you see this indirectly referenced in, say, the parable of the wheat and the tares, the parable of the seine net, where the essentially the unbeliever is judged first, and then the believers are collected to righteousness due to the reward. So that's what he's talking about here. This is the following the great wedding feast of the Lamb. Also sometimes called the winepress of the Lord. I'll let you look that up to understand what that means. Okay? Yee. Also known as the Great Squish. Yikes. So yeah, it is actually a reference to the second coming. It's not a reference to those who die in the body and then are present in spirit in the Lord. It's the whole gathering of the body of believers. All of them. And it's that gathering of that body of believers for the great wedding feast of the Lamb. So that's what's being referred to in this passage. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, the next one here is also from Japonis Konrafi for $10. Thank you for the super chat. Shishak I, Dynasty 22nd, took all treasures from the Jerusalem temple, 1 Kings 14:25-27. His Karnak list does not include this. Correct. Could this have been tribute under threat rather than an all-out attack? Yes, it was. Okay? So here's what happens. We can tell by his itinerary of his campaign is listed on the Bubastite portal at Karnak. And one of the things is he does come south through the Judean foothills and is on a direct trajectory to Jerusalem. But he doesn't take Jerusalem. He sort of hits Beit Shean and then veers off and hits some other Judahite towns. So he doesn't capture the biggest prize in the Judahite foothills. Okay? So, what seems to have happened was the king of Judah paid off Shishak the First so he wouldn't attack Jerusalem. Basically, you got all the gold, no reason for you to attack, just go your separate way. And frankly, that's all Shishak wants. He wants the gold, that's it. You know, that's what Shishak wants. He's into the gold. They're, again, trying to shore up their economy using what they can steal from other nations. So, once Shishak's got the gold, he doesn't need anything else. He has no other business with the city of Jerusalem. So, that seems to be what happened. Now, there is recorded at the Bubastite portal a very, very large offering given to the god Amun-Ra. Very large. Many talents of gold. So, it does seem that he got let's just say came into possession of a large monetary sum during this campaign that doesn't seem to quite be explained by just pillaging some little cow towns. So he did seem to come into a big sum of cash somehow. So that is recorded at the Bubastite portal. But at the same time too, we have also 1 Kings 14, 25 to 27 that basically says, you know, he was bought off as well. So that's why he doesn't conquer Jerusalem, but yet manages to walk away with all the goodies. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. Asking Weir for 199. Aren't you the guy that kind of got banned from Sean McDowell's channel? I recall that happening. For asking a very, very good question. One that McDowell should have been asked. That was pretty amazing. I saw your reply on McDowell's channel, and then it just disappeared. It was amazing. Just like that. I don't know. Should I tell him the question? Or should I just post it? Your troublemaking ways have got you into trouble, it seems. I don't know if I can put it up here even. Let's see if I can put it up. Let's see. What did he ask? Here. Save image as. Just a second here as I find it. Save. Browse. Yeah, it says you're still gonna trust Kennedy after David Falk tore him to pieces on your channel, might I add? I'll post this, show this up here. There we go. Second comment from the top. Yeah, that comment's not on his channel anymore. I don't think he cared for that very much. We did. I, however, love that. I love the comment. Great comment. Amazing, though. Not there anymore. Wonder what happened to it. Yeah, Addison, you can't read it. That's because you sent me a low-res GIF. But anyway, get back to your question. Who has better theology, Ken Ham and Peter Enns? Uh, that's a terrible question. Ken Ham has really no theology. I mean, he's all about, young Earth creationism. That's his shtick. That's his entire shtick. He's not a great theological mind, and he never was a great theological mind. So, Ken Ham doesn't really have a theology. Peter Enns, on the other hand, has a lot of theology. It's just not very good. Now, for a guy who did his PhD dissertation on Exodus, he's got some glaring omissions in his knowledge. He does not know Egyptian culture very well at all. I did notice that when I heard him talk recently on his Exodus series, he just does not seem to know Egyptian culture or the way Egyptians think all that well. So it does seem that his knowledge of the Exodus is really constrained to Old Testament theology and scholarly discourse. So, he doubts, like a lot of critical scholars do, that there was an Exodus. He thinks there was an event like the Exodus, but he thinks there's no evidence that that the Israelites were ever in Egypt or anything even similar, and that's malarkey. I have some real issues with some of his justification for his skepticism of the Exodus. So, like for example, he said that if the Exodus actually happened, the Egyptians wouldn't just bury it under the carpet. They would find a way to spin it and talk about it. Yeah, that might occur in other ancient Near Eastern cultures, but not in Egypt. In Egypt, they really did bury bad news. Egypt lost many battles. You'll never see them, not in any of the history of Egypt, will you find them record a lost battle. Okay? because the fact is that most of the inscriptions we have in Egypt are religious inscriptions. They're meant to be offerings to the gods. They're not historical records. And this is one of the things you can't seem to get through to some of these Old Testament scholars. They're used to dealing with historical prisms from, say, the Assyrians and the Mesopotamians that record historical events. The Egyptians aren't recording historical events for the sake of history. They're recording events of history as for the sake of offerings to their gods. That puts a completely different complexion on what they're going to record and what they're not going to record. They're not going to record any failures. Look bad in front of your gods? Come on. But this is what happens when you don't understand the context, is you come up with these sort of screwy ideas. So that's sort of my thought on Peter Enns, is he's beholden to consensus thinking, and that's not surprising for someone who came out of Harvard Divinity School. I mean, that's basically all they teach you is, hey, here's the consensus, you follow that, whatever it is. And he doesn't seem to think much beyond that. So, anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And getting in trouble with Josh McDowell. Or sorry, Sean McDowell. What would Josh think? Keep it up, Addison. All right. Okay, the next super chat here. Justice for Addison. Yeah, I gotta take that. Come up yet? Nope. Oh, there it is. Justice for Addison. Hashtag justice for Addison. Well, let's get back here to the super chats. Okay. Okie dokie. Let's see here. Mr. HBOB for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thought about doing book reviews. May I suggest The Exodus, How It Happened and Why It Matters by Dr. Ari Friedman. Thought it was excellent. He argues it was real and only the Levites. Yeah, okay. He's got... I don't do book reviews. That's not quite true. I do book reviews for academic journals. Okay. Basically, when someone sends me a book, and I get to keep the book and do a book review, and those I do. Those I do. I generally don't do book reviews for YouTube. Basically, YouTube is a video medium, and people who are watching video usually don't have time to read and aren't great readers. Some are, but it's not a media that adapts well to video. Okay? So with that said, doing a book review of a book on a video is almost usually a formula for putting people asleep. So I don't do book reviews. Now, my thoughts on Friedman are twofold. If you ever go to a Friedman lecture on the Exodus, 80% of his lecture is going to be him talking about the documentary hypothesis. Okay? That's going to be 80% of it. Right at the top of the head. Right off the top. 80% is their first 80% is going to be him talking about JPEND. That's going to be his lecture. The last 20% is going to be him talking about the Levites and how they are the core of the Exodus, that the small Levite group, and he's talking real small here, a few hundred. They leave Egypt. They settle in Canaan. They convert the native Canaanites to become Israelites, essentially. That's his hypothesis in a nutshell. Okay? I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it because in Friedman's world, there's no conquest. It's a peaceful infiltration model, essentially. It's a peaceful infiltration model with a stub of an Exodus attached to it. And again, it's all predicated on the idea that the documents of the Pentateuch were transmorgified from the beginning. So we're not talking here just a little bit of redaction. We're talking the whole thing is transformed from essentially the Levitical law that was imposed by the Levites to almost a grandiose, fictitious history that's shaped through redaction. So I don't have a high opinion of Friedman's work, in all honesty. I just don't see it being a good compromise. And that's what he's trying to do here. He is trying to have his cake and eat it too. Okay? Oh, that's priceless. 501 Mobius. No Canaanites were harmed in the making of this conquest. Well, according to Friedman, no Canaanites were harmed in the making of that conquest because they are the Israelites. And they're just more or less persuaded to give up their bacon and their pork and their sausage. Yeah, good luck on that. Yeah, I'm not buying it. Essentially, I'm not buying. Well, look, I'm not buying his documentary hypothesis. And if I'm not buying the documentary hypothesis, I'm certainly not buying his Levite Exodus. So, just 501 Mobius. That is literally what he said. Aristarus BOB at 501 Mobius. That is literally what he says, not word for word, but he argues that those were made up to bolster their reputation to future generations. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that is essentially what he's driving at here. You know, that the infiltration of the Levites was really too small to do any sort of real conquest. So therefore, what you had was a peaceful infiltration where the Levites just happened to convince everybody not to mix fibers, not to eat pork. I mean, it was probably pretty easy to convince people to give up eating cat and dog. But the giving up eating of the horse and the pork, that might take a little more doing. So anyway, it's just... Oh, good question from Paul Thompson. Why is the idea that the Israelites are just the Canaanites so popular? It's a great question because it is an attempt to explain why we don't see burned down villages everywhere. It comes out of a misunderstanding of what the conquest actually is. So, and some of this goes back to Albright. And I'm not villainizing Albright. But Albright thought he saw dozens of villages destroyed by destruction layers in Canaan. Well, it turns out that those villages spanned over several hundred years. And it turned out that very, very few actual places were destroyed during, say, the late 13th, early to mid 12th century. Now, the idea that the Israelites were coming into Canaan and destroying every town they saw is not what the conquest was really about. One of the things that we have to understand about the conquest, and a lot of atheists get this wrong, even a lot of Bible scholars don't get this right. The Israelites were not coming in to loot and destroy villages and cities in Canaan. That's not what they came for. They came to move in. They're moving into people's the Canaanites' homes. They're eating their food. They're tending the vineyards they didn't plant. They're eating their livestock. They're essentially setting them home. You don't burn down a home you want to live in. Okay? This is why we don't find new construction in Canaan for the first 50 plus years that the Israelites are in Canaan. Because they already have homes. They're living in the Canaanites' homes. Eventually, though, they will start around 1150. They will start making 4-room Semitic homes again, just like they were building at Avaris. But that's because they're growing at that point. And they need new homes. So rather than just, rather than just keep building in Canaanite style, they're going to build in their own style. So that's what's going to happen is for the first 50 years, they're living in the Canaanite villages and then in the Canaanite homes. Eating their food, using their cutlery, using their plates, using their bowls. And why not? They're there. They're free. You don't have to make them. It's part of the rewards. So, but anyway, that's why the reason of the infiltration is so popular, is to try to explain why we don't see the mass destructions of towns and villages in Canaan during, say, the time when we would expect the conquest to take place. And that's because it's reading an interpretation into the Bible. The Bible never says that all these towns are destroyed. It doesn't say that at all. Only like 3 major cities have been described as being destroyed by fire. Everything else is just assumed to have been by these people who are expecting that interpretation. So anyway, and again, it's another accommodation to an interpretation. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's a great follow-up question, and I want to thank the original super chat as well. Okay. Back to where we were. When did Joshua live again? Oh, Joshua lived from, okay, he was 20 years old, at least 20, the first year of the Exodus. So roughly, if the Exodus takes place in 1265, he would have been born around 1285 BC. So that's when he would have been born, around 1285. So, and he lived through into, and he was allowed to enter the land of Canaan. So, it says he lived to 110, I believe, but, you know, probably more likely in his 80s or 90s. And I'll leave you to do the math. So if he lived into his 90s, you know, he would have essentially lived into the beginning of the 12th century. Oh, 54. Okay, next one here is from Mystery Flavor for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. What is the significance of the 3 spans of 14 generations in Matthew 1:17? What is the Apostle Matthew wanting the reader to understand? Okay. First of all, we have to understand what he's doing here. What he's doing is what's called gematria. Is essentially using a kind of numerology to demonstrate that Christ was the Messiah. Now, he's doing it in a very artificial way. Every commentator pretty much admits this. The significance of 14 is if you take the consonants from the name David and you add them together, you get the number 14. So the idea was from Noah to from Adam to, I believe it's David, you have 14 generations. I mean, it's not really, but then from David to the exile, another 14, and then from the exile to Christ, another 14. Right? Now, I say it's artificial because Matthew skips a lot of members of that genealogy, of those genealogies. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to use a genealogy to show pedagogically that Christ is the son of David, essentially. And it's a kind of pedagogy. It's kind of it's a teaching tool. It's not really meant to be a precise record. It's not meant to be a precise record of a genealogy. And he does skip a lot of stuff. I actually wish Matthew had sort of forgone the whole Gamatria thing and given us more genealogical data. That would have actually been more. Fulvison, pedagogy, uh, basically teaching. It's a toledot or a genealogy used to teach, and Israelites did this from time to time. One of the things you learn when you start really studying genealogies in the Bible is it's not a one-size-fits-all. They're not all designed with the same purpose in mind. Some of them are used as teaching tools to show you, say, okay, this guy did a bad thing. You look down his posterity. His posterity is doing bad things. Don't do bad things. Okay? So you also get other kinds of genealogies that serve other purposes. For example, the one in 1 Chronicles 33 to 36 is actually kind of to give the posterity of Samuel, who was an Ephraimite, honorary Levite status so they can continue serving as singers in the temple. Okay? So we do have all these sort of ways to communicate things during using genealogies. Another example is the genealogy of Uzzah. You find at the beginning of that passage with Uzzah where he gets zapped by the Ark of the Covenant. That passage starts with the small genealogy of Uzzah. You find out he's one of David's nephews. Now, the writer couldn't just come out and say he's David's nephew, but he uses a genealogy so that you can figure that out for yourself. Yeah, Paul, absolutely. Honorary adoption genealogy for Samuel. Yeah, absolutely. It is. Because we know that Samuel's ancestors, his oldest known ancestor is Zuph, a Ephraimite from the land of Ephraim, for Samuel 1:1. So genealogies do all sorts of heavy lifting in the Bible. All sorts of heavy lifting of meaning. So in the case of, say, Matthew here is trying to emphasize the Davidic line of Jesus using this gematria in a genealogy. So that's what he's trying to do, is he's trying to use the genealogy to do that heavy lifting. So if you aren't persuaded by, say, the actual line of David that's mentioned there, you're supposed to, the gematria here is supposed to resonate with you as a native Israelite. Okay? So it's a way of presenting the data in such a way that it's more palatable to an Israelite. So anyway, that's why Matthew is using gematria here, and that's the reason why he's using 14, because 14 is the number that's representative of David when his consonants are added up. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. The next super chat here. Oh, we're going through this quickly tonight. Hmm. Okay. Captain Seb for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on Michael Brown's Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus volume? Any good alternatives to it that you know of? Okay. I have not read Michael Brown's Answering Jewish Objections. Now, I am familiar with some of his work. I've actually liked some of his work. He's not exact. I know he's put a lot of work into, for example, the whole idea of Israelite slavery. I think he's done a decent job of that. I think but he's not exactly a theologian either. So I'm not sure of some of his other work. So I'm reticent to recommend it because I haven't actually read it. Now, with that said, a lot of Jewish objections are kind of a train wreck, to be honest. And having many Jewish relatives myself, I've seen this firsthand. Okay, so I'm familiar with often how these objections go. So, just to be honest about that, I've seen a lot of those objections that just don't hold any water. So there was a time when there was a lot more of this stuff going around. Now, I know that Jews for Jesus and Chosen People Ministry have made some materials on this. So, you know, as I said, I've Jewish counter apologetics is meant to. It's more appeals to emotion than anything else. You know that you know there's a lot of those apologetics are, say, not so much content based, but an appeal like, oh, you know, those Christians, why would you want to follow a Gentile like Jesus? Well, Jesus wasn't a Gentile, he was a Jew. Well, why would you want to follow a Western religion that's persecuted Jews for millennia? Well, there's a lot of bad blood between both sides. So there's, I've heard these firsthand. Again, as I said, my relatives. So, so anyway, it's just you do get that, just so there is that. Now, I don't doubt that there's some serious Jewish objections. I don't doubt that. I think I can see the possibility of this. You just don't normally encounter it. So I don't know if he's going for the high bar here or the low bar. If Michael Brown is going for the high bar, that has the problem that, okay, these are not objections anyone's using. If he's going for the low bar on this, then it might even almost seem like he's punching down. So, he's kind of between a rock and a hard place on this one, in all honesty. So, again, I don't know any good alternatives for this other than basically to say, ask, say, Jews for Jesus or Chosen People Ministry. They'll have good resources and they'll know what's sort of best for communicating to say Jews, essentially. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that helps. Okay. Next super chat here is from Paul Thompson for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsor Costco's question. Where I am. All right, 8:14. Okay. Costco asks, Genesis 24:47-49. What is the importance of the nose ring and the bracelets given to Rebecca? Does this give us any insight on ancient Hebrew marital customs compared to other groups? Let's look at that. Genesis 24. Okay. All right, so this is Jacob and Rebecca. So 47. Verse 45. Before I'd finished speaking my heart, behold, Rebecca came out with her jar on her shoulder and went down to the spring and drew. And I said to her, please let me drink. And she quickly lowered her jar from her shoulder and said, drink, I will water your camels also. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. Then I asked her and said, whose daughter are you? And she said, daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. And I put the ring on her nose and the bracelet on her wrists. And I bowed down and worshiped the Lord. And so, okay, this is Isaac's wife, Rebecca. And bless the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who guided me right to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Okay. Now, this is a kind of dowry. That's what this is. Essentially a bride price. So I don't think there's anything specific about the nose ring other than we do see this sometimes. Like there are actually some groups of Jews that still wear nose rings. You find this in, say, amongst, say, Moroccan Jews. Moroccan Jews, they still wear the nose rings, and it was a sign of marriage. Now, did this apply to the ancient Israelites? Hard to say. But if she's daughter of Nahor's son, okay, then there's a distant bloodline there of Amorites. So she's not from the line of Abraham, and this is not necessarily a Hebrew tradition, because there's no Hebrews yet as such. Abraham's had basically one generation. Now, a generation here being probably more of a clan. So we go from the clan of Abraham to the clan of Isaac, and this is the bride of Isaac, who's being purchased with the dowry for the arrangement to be married. So now we do have some idea what these bracelets look like. Part of the reason is because we have extant versions. Now, these aren't just single bracelets. These are groups of bracelets, of graduated bracelets that go down the arm. So there might be 20 bracelets here involved in a set. So basically, Abraham's servant here is just piling the metal on her. She's probably going back to her tent looking like an armored clanking knight. So she's getting a lot of metal on her. And the nose ring is probably not just a single ring. It's probably a ring attached to chains that could also be attached to the earlobes. Okay? So there'd be probably earrings, a nose ring, and then a chain that went in the front. It's almost like a veil of metal. Almost. And again, it was worn by married women. So that's probably what's going on here, is that this is the marriage contract that's being put in place. So she's getting the goods.
Mystery flavor.
Mystery flavor Bajoran, yeah. Yeah, sort of, yeah. Yeah, it is instead of it just being the earlobe, it's just ear to nose. And to the other side as well. So that was not unusual. Sarah gets something similar from Pharaoh. You know, when Abraham and Sarah do their scheme, you know, Pharaoh gives her a veil of silver that she wears across the face, you know, to show she's married. So, you know, this is not unusual. It's just, you know, we just don't do it today. We have other symbols of marriage today, like the wedding ring. You know, they wouldn't have worn wedding rings back then. But they had other symbols to show that a woman or man was married. So, anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thank you for sponsoring that super chat. And thank you for that great question, Costco. BC for $10 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Controversy time. Oh, great. I can always use more controversy. Yeah. Oh, no. Okay, and he says, did the Sabbath change from Saturday to Sunday? No, it didn't. Or should Christians understand the Sabbath and the Lord's Day are different things? Well, they are different things, but we'll get into that. If they are different, should we keep both? Not necessarily. Okay, and it's complicated, all right? Now, we got to understand a few things. There's some underlying things that are going on here. The reason why the Israelites were commanded to keep the Sabbath was the terms and conditions of the Sinai Covenant Treaty. Okay? Now, we have to understand that the Sinai Treaty, the Sinai Covenant, was a vassal suzerain treaty. Basically, a vassal suzerain treaty, a suzerain vassal treaty is when a suzerain, a king, conquers a land, and he basically establishes a treaty with the people. And he basically says to the people, okay, I will, you know, protect you. And if you don't rebel and you give me tribute and you do this thing, provision of the law, I won't come in back and bash any more skulls. And the vassals say, okay, you know, we'll do exactly what you tell us to do, and everything will be peaceful. Now, in the case of the Sinai Covenant, that provision is the Sabbath law. The Sabbath law. That's the sign that the covenant is still being kept. Now, that's a Sabbath law includes a whole lot of things. It includes the ceremonial law. It includes the years of Jubilee, where debts are forgiven and slaves are let go. You know, there's a lot of baggage to that Sabbath law. So when we get to the time of Christ, and Christ is paying for our sins and essentially fulfilling the terms of the Sabbath covenant, the Sabbath then becomes something different. It no longer becomes an obligation under the law, but something that man can take pleasure in and rest and enjoy the Lord. So, that said, the Sabbath did not technically change from Saturday to Sunday. It did change from being required to being beneficial. So the day didn't change, the nature of the Sabbath changed. And that's because the sacrifice of Christ covered the Sabbath in its entirety. This is why Jesus calls himself the Lord of the Sabbath, and that he is the fulfillment of the Sabbath. Okay? So that's the new covenant. So it's being replaced. The old covenant is being replaced by the new covenant. As Bonbon points out here in Jeremiah 31. So, they are different things. Now, the Lord's Day, the Sunday, is celebrated by Christians because that's the day that Jesus resurrected from the tomb. So early Christians used to celebrate both the Saturday and the Sunday, the Sabbath and the Lord's Day. That's why we call it the Lord's Day too, is because that's the day that Christ rose from the dead. Okay? So, do you keep both? Well, there's no necessity to keep both. Okay? There's no necessity anymore to keep the Sabbath. It's now beneficial, though, for you to keep the Sabbath. In which case, it's up to you to decide which day you do it. For many Christians, they celebrate the Sabbath, their Sabbath, that is, and Sabbath means rest, on the Sunday. That's perfectly acceptable. You go to church, you have fun, you don't work. You go out, you have really nasty, tough steak at the Golden Corral. It's still rest. So, how you celebrate your Sabbath is up to you. Basically, just don't work. Leave the increase to God. Essentially, that's what it's for. You trust God and leave the increase up to Him. So, you can make that day any day you want. But you have to understand that as long as you are taking a day off, you are still keeping the provisions of the Sabbath because of what Christ did for you to change the nature of the Sabbath. Okay? So I hope that explains this. Thank you very much for the super chat. It is a topic a lot of people get confused about, so it's a really, really great question. Very, very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. Okay, the next super chat here is from Alexandre for 10 Romanian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you believe figures like Justinian and Charlemagne that made Christianity their national religion and used their political power to aid Christianity were a net gain or a loss to Christendom? Oh boy. Okay. I'll just read it here. Okay, I see it. And he follows up. Just to clarify, my question was inspired by Michael Jones' recent scuffle with Christian nationalist people. I'm not a Christian nationalist myself, but calling them Antichrist is excessive, I think. Okay. IP right now is on a kick against Christian nationalists, okay? Now, I've got some beef with Christian nationalists too. I think that there's some problematic aspects to it that I think we need to really really deprecate. Now, okay, now in the case of, say, Justinian, you're talking the Roman Empire there. Church and state were not separated. They were never separated in the Roman Empire. There was a sort of a state religion that was always part of the Roman Empire. So if Justinian did that, then he's just a product of his time. Charlemagne is essentially trying to recapture the Holy Roman Empire, or is trying to recapture the Roman Empire in his Holy Roman Empire. And there's this old joke regarding the Holy Roman Empire. It wasn't holy, it wasn't Roman, and it wasn't an empire. Okay, so take that for what you will. It was very true that in Europe there was a lot of intermingling between church and state, a lot of it, and kings meddled in religion all the time, and religion meddled in the affairs of the state all the time. So, was any of that good? Was that a net gain or loss? That's something historians are going to debate. It had some benefits. It also had some liabilities, too. So it wasn't a complete loss, and it wasn't a complete gain. So I don't think you can really do the moral calculus here to say whether or not it's a complete loss or a net gain. It's just, you just really can't do that. I mean, just take something like the Crusades. The Crusades are a very controversial topic. There was this belief amongst Europeans that the land of the Holy Land itself was holy. So the very land itself was holy. So that the fact that it was in the hands of Muslims was a complete religious affront. Okay. Yeah, okay. The Europeans really did not get their shoes on for 17 years when they were asked for help, but that's a whole different matter. But did something productive come out of the Crusades? Well, yeah, something did. First of all, paper started to be imported into the secret of paper, which was used by the Muslims, was brought into Europe. Much of the intellectual revolution of the Enlightenment and the Renaissance was driven by the printing press. The printing press wouldn't have been possible without the invention of paper. And essentially, the Europeans get the technology from the Muslims, who got it from the Chinese. So there were advantages to this. The fact is that the Crusades also prevented Islamic expansion into Europe at a time when Islam was growing leaps and bounds through conquest. They did hold the tide until the Mongols did a real number on the Muslims. So, there was that too. We have to remember that the big fear in Europe through right up until the 16th century was Islam. While I mean, that's one of the reasons why the Protestant Reformation got as good a hold as it did. Because while this little Protestant Reformation was going on in Germany, the Islam was on the doorstep of Vienna. They were just on the outskirts of Vienna. So, to the Europeans, especially in Southern Europe, Islam was seen as a much, much greater threat to their way of life than the Protestant Reformation. Now, once Islam withdrew from the steppes of Vienna, then the Catholic states could refocus their attention on, say, this spreading Protestant problem in Northern Europe. But by that time, Protestantism had already taken hold. But it did delay a lot of, say, Muslim incursions into Europe. So the Crusades had an effect. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Well, I think it's a good thing that all of Europe didn't become Islamic. But it could have happened. A different history where they didn't go and do the Crusades could have ended up with that. And we certainly know that the Renaissance and Enlightenment would not have turned out the same way without the importation of the recipe for paper. That much we also know. So, it's also true though that a lot of books came into Europe. Some of it was preserved by Islam that was brought back during the Crusades. Some of it was later on brought during, say, the fall of Constantinople. But these are the sort of the trends that sort of demark these things. So, it's kind of like that Monty Python skit. The Life of Brian. Where the Jewish insurrectionists are going. What did the Romans ever do for us? Well, they built roads. Well, besides roads, what did they do for us? Aqueducts. Well, besides roads and aqueducts, what did the Romans ever do for us? Law courts. Well, besides law courts. And this is the point. There's a lot of benefits that came from the Roman occupation of Judea. It's not a one-way street. So, when you look at, say, these historical periods where, there was theocracy and some of these states used Christianity as a national religion, it's not a one-way street. It's a give and take. And this is why... Oh, come on, Bonbon. You're still using Roman roads today. I know there's still Roman roads in Israel. Those roads have lasted. Okay. They're still there. The ones you've paved today won't last 100 years, but those Roman roads will still be there. They might have been evil, but they made great roads. The better to drive chariots on.
Well, true. That was the point.
That was the point, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
But
also, Romans weren't building roads for being beneficent. It was so they could move their chariots in and out quickly.
Also worked great.
But it also, yeah, it did also work great for trade, yeah. So Roman roads are virtually indestructible. They're virtually indestructible. They're still around. You can go to Paris and still find Roman roads there. In downtown Paris. 10, 20 centuries later, then they're still using Roman roads. They're still using aqueducts. Those aqueducts are still in use. There's still places in Europe that are entirely, their water is dependent on Roman aqueducts. It's crazy. Jack Ray just gave 10 free memberships. Thank you very much, Jack Ray. We really appreciate that. So yeah, it's going to be a give and take. It's not however, now, with that said, we are living in a modern democratic state. I don't think that Christian nationalism has a place in a modern democratic state. I mean, they are trying to push a return to Torah law in government. I don't think that's going to work. There's some that is not going to work. So I think in its time it was it could be understood, even if it's a net loss to Christendom, and sometimes it was. At the same time, too, it's certainly not appropriate today. So anyway, Alexandri, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that discussion sort of helped flesh out some of the issues. Okay, JP for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on Japan's Christian century missionary efforts from 1550 to 1650? What do you think we can learn about spreading the faith? Ooh. That's a very interesting historical period. Very, very interesting historical period. One of the for those who don't know, Japan's Christian century was when Jesuits came to Japan and started preaching the gospel, and it took off like wildfire in Japan. But it also threatened the military dictatorship there, because a lot of the military dictatorship demanded that complete obedience to one's lord. So any lord other than the daimyo or the shogunate was going to be seen as a threat. So it resulted in some of the most brutal repression that we've ever seen. There's no way other way to put it. The repression of Christians in the years following the Christian century was just unbelievable. 80% tax, and that's if you recanted. You were a pariah in your society. You were executed. You were tortured. I mean, torture. Their view of their brand of torture was just, just amazingly brutal. Absolutely amazingly brutal. And they had ways of keeping you alive as they tortured you. They would just, it was unspeakable, the horrors that they perpetuated. Now, what happened as a result? And, the Christian century ended with a last stand. I think it was from the Tanaka clan, who basically were the last Christian holdouts of Christian samurai. And they basically, held up in a abandoned fortress, but they were overrun, essentially. There was no way they could basically defend themselves against the shogunate, and they were all slaughtered, essentially. Those that didn't commit suicide, anyway. And many of them didn't. Many of them chose to be slaughtered instead of committing suicide. Oh, yeah. Warrior of the Most High. There were many Christian samurai. In fact, one of the interesting things, I used to collect Japanese sword guards called Tsuba. And one of the you would occasionally come across what was called toke suba. These were suba in the shape of a clock gear. But they weren't a clock gear. What they actually were was the sun rays of, and they would sometimes have the initials IHS in them. And it was a logo that was used by the Jesuits. And many samurai had these toke suba made and put on their swords to basically as a reminder that they were Christian. So they are beautiful. They are absolutely gorgeous. I've tried very, very desperately to get my hands on one. Couldn't. There was one guy who was really into collecting them, and he just like sort of scooped them all off the market. He hoarded them. Yeah, he absolutely hoarded them. So, I tried to get one for my collection, but I just couldn't. But they were, yeah, there was actually a large number of these toke suba made. So absolutely, they estimated there was at one point over 100,000 Christian samurai. So it was not a small number. And they figured that the amount of converts during the Christian century in Japan reached 2 million. It reached 2 million. So this wasn't a religion. Christianity was not a religion that had no traction in Japan. Far from it. It was growing leaps and bounds. And that's also one of the things that scared the shogunate, was that the speed at which Christianity was growing in Japan was so fast. They thought that all the traditional religions that preserved the obedience to the shogun were going to be, sort of swept aside. So there are some lessons that we can learn from this. The one thing is that I think was one of the big mistakes of, say, the Jesuits was that they tried to make it a Jesuit-only sort of thing. So the Jesuits really tried hard to keep other forms of Christianity out of Japan. So if a Protestant ended up going to Japan, they would make it really tough. If even someone from Eastern Orthodoxy, if they had gone to Japan, they would have found it really tough. Basically, the Jesuits saw Japan as their own monopoly. So I think that was a huge problem. So anytime you see the gospel as a monopoly of your denomination, that's going to create issues for you down the road. Yeah, Warrior of the Most High gets it right here. Tribalism. Yeah, absolutely. That's what it is. Tribalism. So I think that's one of the lessons we can take away from the Christian century, is that in making it a strictly Jesuit missionary effort, it weakened the missionary effort overall. Second is that because it was a Jesuit effort, a lot of the converts were converted to Catholicism, not necessarily Christianity. So because they were converts to Catholicism, they maintained the ritual aspects, but not the theology of Christianity. And this created, when Christianity did go underground, and a lot of we discovered this after World War II, with the Meiji Restoration, Christianity was made legal again. But Christians that went into hiding didn't trust the system. They didn't come out of hiding. You did have Methodists, say, missionaries go to China and try to start efforts and found it was really, really difficult. But it was only after World War II, when the Japanese government was deposed, that the Christians in hiding started coming out. And when they started coming out, what they came out as was not recognizable as Christianity. You had tritheism. You had Marian worship. I mean, really Marian worship, where they forgot that Christ was supposed to be the center of Christianity and made Mary the center of Christianity. I mean, you had some weird aberrations. You had basically, I saw this one ancestor of these these Christians who had a little cupboard that he'd open up and he'd worship an idol. He worshipped an idol. An idol of Christ, not knowing that there was a real Christ. He knew nothing about Christianity. I mean, you just got the most incredible distortions of Christianity. And, some Jesuits have gone back to Osaka. And, they have started opening talks with some of the ancestors of the native converts of Japan and try to get them back on track, only to discover that it's not so easy. It's quite hard. Some of these people have been, using these, have been believing this way for 60, 80 years. And then they get some 18-year-old Jesuit, missionary coming in and said, oh, wait, we were the organization that helped convert your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. But what you're doing right now isn't Christian anymore. They're not going to accept that. It's like, they're going to have a really hard time with that. And that's what they're discovering. And there are, as I said, there's still hidden Christians in Osaka today. They're coming out slowly. But one of the things that they have been taught from their earliest times is, you don't talk about Christianity. You don't talk about Christianity. And it's still true in Japan that, oh no, they didn't have any Bibles. Warrior of the Most High they did not have the Bible? No, they did not have the Bible. The Bible had not been translated into Japanese. They would not have a copy of the Bible until modern times. So they had no Bible. They had a couple translations of Psalms. That's what they had. Yeah, so there's a lot of there's a lot of problems with that whole missionary effort. And that led to consequences down the road. So, yeah, Slammer, yeah, no Bibles. They didn't have Bibles. Yeah, it was just not seen as a priority to translate to Japanese. So, they had icons. Funny enough, the Japanese had icons, but no Bibles. So yeah, it's just it's hard to imagine the missionary effort without a Bible translation. But that's the way. I mean, but we have to understand, for say the Jesuits, this was normal. This was normal missionary method. You go in, despite having a translation, and in a century or two, if things work out, well, you'll put in the effort. It'll teach them Latin, yes. Oh yeah, there were Japanese people who learned Latin. There were, um, and some of them had access to the Latin Vulgate. Okay, so some of them had that, but those leaders who learned Latin were often singled out, and the Japanese were very, very good at cutting the head off the dragon. They knew who was in charge, they knew who the leaders were, and they would dispatch them pretty fast. So, anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. It's a very interesting question from a very interesting period of time. Very, very interesting. So, anyway, I want to thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. Jack Ray here has just gone crazy with the memberships. So I want to thank Jack Ray for, gee, how many has he done now? Slammer keeps missing it? It can be very hard to grab those at times. Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you very much for the support, Jack Ray. We really appreciate it, and it really does help our channel when you give these memberships out. And it helps our community as well. So we very, very much appreciate it. Okay, that's an excellent follow-up question. Let me just record where I am here. Lego David asks, thoughts on the state of Christianity in Japan today? Have the Jesuit missions had a good long-term success or not? Generally not. There's a handful of Catholic churches in Japan. Actually, the biggest Christian denomination in Japan right now is Methodism. And that's because the Methodist missionaries went in after the Meiji Restoration and started establishing churches. So you'll actually find more Methodists right now than you'll find Catholics in Japan. Now, with that said, after World War II, we had kind of a lost opportunity. A few evangelical missionaries went to Japan, but not very many. Japan was sort of seen as kind of a backwards place that nice people didn't go to. So we have a few, say, more charismatic churches in Japan today. Japanese culture. Japanese culture is very afraid of religion. They're very afraid of religion. You go to Japan right now, you don't talk a religion. That's seen as something scary. And they've done a lot of polls in Japan asking about what they think of religion. Religion is something that they will celebrate in a public way. Like, for example, public festivals. They don't have a problem, like, for example, with, say, Shinto festivals, where they will do, say, a public sort of festival, but that's public religion. And that's okay. But private faith is not something the Japanese are comfortable with. Private faith, they don't want to hear about it. It scares group cohesion. It's saying you're going to believe something that everyone else around you doesn't believe. Given how Japan extols the group over the individual, personal and private faith is not something that's going to be let's just say welcome. Now, when I went to seminary, the guy who sat next to me in one of my theology classes was the son of a pastor from Japan, and he was learning to be a pastor at TEDS. He was going to go back and he was going to take over his father's church eventually. So I got to ask him a fair bit about, what is it like to be a pastor in Japan? How big was his church? His church was 15 people. 15 people. And he was so proud of this. This is a big church. This was a rolling success for a Japanese church. 15 people. Whoa. Yeah. Jack Ray, 15 is more than 0. Well, yes it is. Yes it is. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But that sort of shows you that, when 15 people counts as a megachurch, you know that the state of religion in a country is not that healthy. Well, yeah, Sonny was different. We won't go into Sonny here. Because he wasn't in Japan. He was in Nigeria. Nigeria's a completely different kettle of fish. Yeah. So, but it isn't unusual in Japan for churches to have 5 people. No. A pastor and 4 others. Not unusual at all. Lego David, any potential solutions to solving this problem in Japan? It's cultural. It's there's a history there. It's hard earth. It's hard soil. Now, Japan is going to have to come to terms with a reality sandwich. Okay? The fact is that the population of Japan is declining rapidly. In fact, it's declining so fast that its social safety net is going to have problems keeping up. There are villages all over Japan that are becoming ghost towns. Just because birth rates are so low in Japan. I mean, it's something like a 0.25% growth rate in Japan. I mean, for every 1 person born, they're losing 3. That's. Yeah, the people are not getting married and they're not having kids. Japan is a dying culture. And the xenophobia that we find in Japan, where they just won't accept outsiders, is accelerating the problem. There's countries that have low birth rates. That's not unusual. But those countries supplement their birth rates with increased immigration. Japan deprecates immigration. They make it really tough to immigrate. Make it really tough to integrate and to integrate in their society. They don't want foreigners. So they're having to deal with the whole problem of of these declining birth rates.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, their work
Work is
culture.
everything.
Oh boy, isn't it? Yeah. Costco says their work culture is quite depressive. It is. It's horrible. I was once somebody presented me with an option, and I never took either one, but someone said, which would you rather do? Would you rather work as an English teacher in Japan or an English teacher in China? And I said, oh, no question. There's no question about this. China. China at least will treat you really, really well as an English teacher. They'll treat you incredibly well in China. Yeah, you're not going to get rich by Western standards, but you're going to be well off by Chinese standards. You'll be respected. Yay! Respected as a teacher. Your students will see you on the street and they'll show you respect. Not so in Japan. Foreign teachers are not treated with respect in Japan. They're not paid well. I noticed that for their posts for professors. The pay is awful. The hours are awful. And there's no respect. So you could have a PhD, be an esteemed scholar, and if you go to Japan, you can expect to be treated like crap. Because that's part of their xenophobic culture. So it is quite unfortunate, but they're also at this point they are reaping the consequences of those policies and those attitudes. So I think, if anything, that's probably the one opening we have for, say, for a potential into, say, spread the good news of Christianity. Because things are going to get bad in Japan. That's a great question. Lego David. Why was Christianity much more successful in South Korea versus Japan? Ooh, that is a wonderful question. The answer is World War II. Before World War II, South Korea was primarily a Buddhist state. Here's what happened, though. Okay? World War II, Japan invades Korea. And they shut down all the churches and the Christian schools. Suddenly, it became the patriotic thing to be Christian against the Imperial Japanese. It became, if you were Korean, that means you were Christian. Just to stick it to the Imperial Japanese. Well, it's another reason why I didn't catch on terribly well in Japan either. But, okay. So, when the Japanese were driven out of Korea, they basically said, well, it's the power of prayer. It's thanks to us becoming Christian that we drove out the Japanese. So in South Korea, Christianity took off like wildfire. And because of that, now on a per capita basis, South Korea sends out more missionaries than any other country. Numerically, the U.S. sends out more missionaries than any country, but per capita, South Korea sends out the most missionaries, bar none. Bar none. And even today, South Korea is still a largely Christian nation, even though it's sort of drifted towards secularism because of, say, technology and science and all that. But that's what happened in South Korea. It was really the Imperial Japanese invading and shutting down all the churches and Christian schools that turned it into something patriotic. Now, as I said, I think something like that, in not exactly in that way, but I think something like that could happen to Japan as they have a population crash. And they are definitely headed for a population crash. So, yeah, it was. I think that's what's going to end up happening in Japan is they're going to have a population crash, and they're going to have to open their borders, and not only open their borders, but make immigration enticing. And once they make immigration enticing, then I think the Japanese will become a little more receptive to Christianity at that point. So anyway, thank you for that great question. I hope that helped. And there were some excellent follow-up questions to this. And a lot of really, really interesting history. A lot of interesting history. Okay, so let's get back to the super chats here. $8.34 is what we left. Okay. Check here of our. Okay, I also want to thank here Talbot Slade, who gave us $700 Canadian. Thank you so much for that really, really generous support. It really helps the channel, and it helps us move towards going full time. So we really, really appreciate the donation and the support. These gifts really help us move forward, and we're so thankful. Thank you so very much. Okay, and PC full time. Yes, we're working to it. We're getting there. We are about halfway to our goal, so we are getting there. Movement is being made. Okay. I think we are there. Okay. The next super chat here is from JP for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Have you read Justin Martyr's dialogue with Trypho? Yes, I have. If so, what'd you think? I think it was a very good dialogue of an early Christian martyr. Okay, he actually has two extant writings. There's his dialogue with Trypho, and then there's another one. I don't remember what the name of it was. It's very. I mean, it's for those who are not familiar with the dialogue. Justin is a convert to Christianity, and he is debating with a Jew whose name is Trypho. And they sort of go back and forth on various things. And it's an interesting dialogue. It's an interesting dialogue because no one in the end comes out on top. Okay? So it's not triumphalist. It does have the clear sense that these are two sincere interlocutors. These are two sincere interlocutors representing their particular religious point of view. So I think it's a great little dialogue. Slammer, letters to the apologies to the Emperor. Yeah, probably it is the other one. I believe that's the other one. Yeah. Thank you, Slammer. So yeah, there's and I have read both. But I mean, frankly, it's how long was it? When were we in Wisconsin? That's when I think I last read it. 2005. Yeah. So it's been a while since I've read it. Okay, but I have read it. But it's a great little dialogue. I would recommend reading it. I think it's very characteristic of second century Christianity, first second century Christianity, and it's a great insight into how people thought in these early days of Christianity. So again, great little dialogue. Highly recommend reading it. So thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped. Okay, BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Does break bread in the New Testament refer to any communal meaning, or is it specifically referring to the partaking of the Lord's Supper communion? Specifically, it's talking about any communal meal. Okay? So when you break bread with somebody, it's not talking specifically about communion, about the Lord's Supper. It can be any communal meaning. Now, we have to understand, too, that when in the early days of Christianity, the Lord's Supper was also combined with a communal meal. We don't do this anymore. I think we should bring that tradition back,
In the churches,
where the potluck doesn't happen after the service, but during the service. But that's what would happen. There would be a communal meal, and then the Lord's Supper would be celebrated. So they would basically eat first. They would have their meal, like their communal meal, and then they would have the ceremonial aspect of the Lord's Supper after. So kind of think of this as an adaptation of, say, the Seder. So in some ways, this is an adaptation of the Seder, except without the first 2 cups. Okay, or the first 3 cups. Okay, so you would have basically the meal portion of the Seder, and then followed by the final cup, the Elijah cup. Okay, so think of the early versions of the breaking of bread and the Lord's Supper as kind of like that, where there was the communal meal, and then followed by the ceremonial aspect of it. So, again, this isn't going to happen, okay, and I'm not seriously recommending it, but that's what they did, is they had a real honest-to-goodness meal to feed you, and then they would have the Lord's Supper. Now, this created a problem, okay? The problem was people would get drunk on the first meal before ever making it to the ceremony aspect. Okay? So what happened was you had the rich who'd come to church early, start pigging out, start sloshing the wine down, and then be totally inebriated when it came to the actual ceremonial aspects. This is why Paul says, don't you have homes to go and eat at and to get drunk in? Why are you bringing it into the church? So it had a problem. Okay, so this is why they stopped doing it. And this is why now potlucks are after the church service and don't have wine. So anyway, so when they talk about the breaking of bread, they are talking about the communal meal where they had more than one people there, and it was just part of the way they set up their church. Because again, these are home churches. These are people coming off the fields. They hadn't had anything to eat all day. So it was seen as something that, people are coming off, the workers are coming off, they're hungry. because Sunday was a work day. Sunday, even though the Christians celebrated the Lord's Supper, there were many slaves, there were many laborers. They worked Sundays. So they would come off the fields and they would have a meal. Because Frank empty disc. Pass the pina colada, would you, Pastor? I love it. Chow Yi. Sunday potlucks. Bless are the part of church history. People, spread the word. Yep. Yep, it is part of church tradition. Not a tradition we follow anymore, but it is part of church tradition. Oh boy. Well, that is true. Potlucks do build community. As my producer just pointed out, she said that potlucks build community, and it is so true. They do. You want to have a cohesive church? Have potlucks. And have them often. Now, don't have them once a year. You want to have them every month, at least. That's how you're going to build a unity, because frankly, food is a social lubricant. Food is a social lubricant. So, a lot of, say, hard feelings can be, smoothed over by people eating together. Yeah, and Chow Yi's right here. A congregation that eats together stays together. And it's true. It's true. You should do this, And frankly, part of the tithe should go to this. Yeah, have people bring in their dishes, but the church should subsidize this too. Because there are some people in your congregation who will not be able to afford to bring a dish, or for whom it is impractical to bring a dish.
We went. And we went.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're going to have students in your congregation who can't afford it. You're going to have people who are rubbing 2 pennies together who can't afford it. They need to be included in this as well. So the church does need to provide some food for the monthly potluck.
That's what stopped. It's rich.
Well, yeah, that is part of the reason why it stopped. My producer points out that the rich in the early church didn't want to share their food with the poor. So that's one of the reasons why it came to an end, is because of basically greed by the rich. So, at the Messianic Jewish congregation I used to go to, they would spend $50 on food for every potluck. They would have 2 trays of kosher cold cuts and cheese, and that would be the church's contribution to the potluck. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways you can do this. I mean, there's not just one solution to do this, but again, to repeat Chow Yi, the church that eats together stays together.
If you really want.
Oh yeah, well, the Hispanic churches have great potlucks. They have fabulous. Yeah, Talbot. Yeah, $50 will not get that to you for you now. I fully admit that. Yeah, that was several years ago. I mean, that was in 2008. So, it's 2008 to 2010. So, yeah, $50 won't buy that for you now. But most churches can afford it. It's not like churches are completely broke. They have an operating budget. That should be part of the operating budget, simply put.
And it's also
Yeah, it does. It does help people who just come to a church to feel welcome as well. So it's got that
We did one and
benefit.
found out it was.
Oh yeah, we did, but we won't go there. Let's not go there. All right. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And yeah, there's a lot of history here, and I think there's some lessons that we can learn that we can apply to the church today. JP for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Name a positive and negative for each denomination. We'll be here all night. I mean, like, there's no way I can answer that question. You know, that's just that is that is not going to be a feasible question to answer. You know, do you realize how many denominations there are, just like in the United States? I mean, there's like 5,000 denominations in the United States. Oh no. I'm not gonna go there. Not gonna go there. My producer is egging me on here. She says, "Do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it." No, for the sake of community harmony, I'm not gonna do it. Let me explain. 24-hour Bible study. No. Well, I am not going to work tomorrow. I still want to get some sleep tonight, okay? It's very late here. I'm sure it's late everywhere right now. Except in Europe. But, woo, woo. Yeah, this is a question that could get me in a load of trouble, so I'm just gonna say thank you for the super chat. Really appreciate it. But not this is an Addison question. Okay. This is an Addison question. I'm not going to do it. But thank you very much for the super chat. Okay, BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Acts 20:7-8. Is this referring to Sunday night, or is Luke using Jewish time and therefore the morning after when Paul left could be Sunday morning? Well, if it's Luke, it's Acts is probably using Roman time. So let's pull up the Bible here just to be sure. Acts 20:7-8. Start verse 6 here. And we sailed from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, that's the Passover, and came to them at Troas within 5 days, and there we stayed 7 days. On the first day of the week, that's Sunday, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul began talking to them, intending to depart the next day, and he prolonged his message until midnight. There's that sort of midnight thing. That's a Roman marker. Okay? And verse 8, and there were many lamps in the upper room where they were gathered together. Okay. Now, Luke tends to use Roman timekeeping, whereas opposed to, say, the other Gospels that do tend to use, say, Jewish. Now, in the Jewish mindset, the day begins and ends at sunset. So it's sunset to sunset. In Roman timekeeping, it's midnight to midnight. So midnight marks the beginning and end of the day. Now, like, for example, in Western time, we tend to mark the day according to midnight. Romans did the same thing. So that's what Luke is doing here, is he's doing the midnight to midnight thing. Okay? So, he's basically talking until the next day, essentially. And he's got to get up in the morning and go on to the next destination. Okay? So, he's talking on the first day of the week. They gather on the first day of the week. They break bread. The first day, that's Sunday. And he continues teaching all Sunday until the next day, which is Monday. So he's leaving Monday morning. So that's what's going on here. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Again, Luke is just normally does everything according to Roman time. So if you keep that in mind, he was taught as a Hellenistic physician. He's much more comfortable using that than he is, using Hebrewisms here. So, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. While I look for the next super chat here, I want to remind everyone that we are now doing these live streams on podcasts. So you can find this, you'll be able to find this after the recording tonight on Spotify if you want to hear it the next day. So we hope you also take the opportunity to re-listen to this on Spotify. Okay, and a very, very generous super chat from Paul for $99.99. Thank you so much for that very generous super chat. We really appreciate it. Super chats like this really help keep us going. So we're so grateful for this. Thank you so very much. This puts food on our table and helps keep this ministry going and hopefully get us to the point where we're going full time. So again, we do really appreciate this. Talbot Slave goes only on Spotify. No. It's not only on Spotify, but we primarily load it on Spotify, and then other services will pick it up. For example, it's also the podcast is also can be found. I think it's on Amazon, Google, Podbeam. One that's not on is Apple, and that's because Apple had some weird verification requirements that weren't exactly easy for me to fulfill. So it's on a lot of services. It's on a lot of services, streaming services. And you can look it up by just typing in Ancient Egypt and the Bible. So it's now available on a lot of streaming services. So I think it's available on 5 or 6 streaming services in total. The only one I know it's not on is Apple. Okay, so Paul says the best part of Egyptian history started in 30 BC. SPQR. I don't know that abbreviation. Let me just look that up. SPQR. Meaning. Oh, it's Rome. Okay. Senate and people of Rome. Okay. Well, how do I say this? Roman history to me is post-interesting. For me, it's all I like. I mean, I'm an Egyptologist. I love Egyptian history. I love ancient Near Eastern history. I mean, I can get totally into say Israelite history, Mesopotamian history. Okay, all that stuff's still interesting. Once I start hitting the Third Intermediate period, okay, interest is starting to wane. By the time of the Ptolemies, not so interested. By the time of the Romans, I've checked out. Time of the Romans, I have totally checked out. It's so post-interesting. I just do not care for Roman history. Not at all. Yeah. Laugh out loud. Jack Ray says, it's good. Jack Ray's up here. Oops. Laugh out loud. Put Dr. Falk asleep by going into Ptolemaic plus period. Yeah, totally. Oh boy. Actually, you know what? I have it on DVD, believe it or not. It's sitting. Oh, I should like post that up. Where's that? Where is it? Come on. My favorite viewer asks, have you seen the HBO show Rome from the late 90s, early 2000s? Thoughts on it? I'll say it made Paul's harsher comments make more sense. I think I have it over. At least I got the second season of it. Yeah, I do. I've got the DVDs. It's on my bookshelf. So, I haven't watched it. It's like I have the second season, but I haven't watched it. In my copious free time. It's like oh my So yeah, I have not watched it at all. But you know, Slammer. After Cleopatra, the streets roll up after 6 p.m. Yeah. Sounds like Seattle. Empty disc. Dr. Falk is too busy rewatching Stargate to watch anything about Rome. Could be. Oh. Well, you know, my wife and I do watch science fiction together. You know, we still do that every night. You know, as we have dinner, we'll watch a science fiction show together. Right now, we're going through old Deep Space Nine reruns. So we might do some Stargate soon. We might do some Stargate soon. So you know, that's how we do our dinner. Yeah, I'll take that right now. BC for $5 Australian. Thank you so much. Have you ever used the phrase "take that, Bembridge scholars" as a victory cry over faulty rival scholarship? Yeah, except the phrase goes "take that, Oxbridge scholars," because that's what Bembridge actually is. It's basically Oxbridge. Oxford and Cambridge. Of course, in North America, it's more like Yarvard. I think at this point I do take that, Yarvard scholars. Yeah. You know, you do get a lot of establishment scholars. And you can tell the establishment scholars, you know, they're sort of, you know, they're totally consensus driven. They don't think outside the box. They're not innovative, creative scholars. They're just, you know, they're focused on their plotting minutia that maintains the status quo. So, you know, it's really not hard to say, take that, Oxbridge or Yarvard. Because the innovation isn't there. The innovation's not there. So I have used phrase very similar to take that, Bembridge scholars. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate that, and I more appreciate the sentiment behind that. Ooh. Jack Ray, ABR has some creative scholars. They create proof when it's not forthcoming. Oh boy, howdy do they. Yikes, it's bad. And it's not getting any better, honestly. It's not getting any better. Now, I'll say this. There is a place for creativity, and there's a place for scholarly rigor, and a good scholar should have both. The problem is when you have one dominating over the other. If you don't have creativity, you don't have innovative research. You have essentially incremental research that really doesn't move the ball forward. So prosaic incremental research is the best way to put it. If you have a scholar that's all creative, you'll get some crazy ideas that are incredibly creative but have no rigor. There was an Egyptologist that, a famous one, Hans Gudicke. Hans Gudicke was a very interesting character. And he would come up with these crazy off-the-wall commentaries to various Egyptian texts. I mean, very creative, incredibly creative. But when you started looking at, well, is it actually true? The fact is, they were just, his ideas were so interesting and seductive that a lot of people would just buy into them without really checking out to see if they were true. And when you started looking at Gudicke's stuff, it was just like, wow, okay, he did a commentary on Sinuhe that was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. It had all sorts of interesting off-the-wall ideas, which, if true, would be fantastic. But then you start looking at it, at the hieroglyphs really closely, and goes, no, this doesn't work. This doesn't work at all. So, there is an aspect where, okay, you need the creativity, but you also need the scholarly rigor. You need both. And if you've got both, you get an Einstein situation. Einstein was a very creative man, but he also had intellectual rigor, which is why his ideas lasted. And this is why you had the famous quote from Einstein that creativity is greater than intelligence. Because Einstein saw creativity as the vehicle for creation of new ideas. His intelligence, however, tempered those ideas. So you need both. You can't do one without the other. But, yeah, you need both. So I wish ABR had a little more rigor in their ideas. They're actually not that creative as far as their hypotheses, only in how they stretch the data. And that's a bad kind of creativity. You don't want to distort the evidence, because that will lead you down a very, very dark road. So anyway, thank you for the question. Very, very much appreciated. And I want to also thank BC for that super chat. Let's see, did we have any more super chats up here, or are we out? Check here. We're getting close to the end. We're at 10:45 anyway, so we'll probably be taking some non-super chats really soon. I think we're close to the end. If not, checking. Well, I think we are at the end of the super chats. I think that's it. Oh, there's one. Oh, nope, that's ABCs. Never mind. Okay, so that is actually the end of the super chat. So we're going to take some non-super chats here and then, oh boy, maybe call it a night before round 11. Woo, 3-hour super chat? A 3-hour live stream? Nah, that can't possibly happen. I can get some sleep tonight. Woohoo! Okie dokie, so let's go looking for some. Okay. Let me explain this one here. In Leviticus 14:52, what does running water mean? Is it literal, like referring to a river, or something else? Let's pull up Leviticus. Leviticus 14. Okay. Now, this is a translation. Verse 52. He shall thus cleanse his house with the blood of the bird and with the running water, along with the live bird, with the cedar wood, and with the hyssop, and with the scarlet string. Okay. Running water here, the word running means living. A living water. It's not actually running. They don't use the verb to run here. They use the verb to live. Mayim. Okay? So they're using the word living. Now, living water is water that comes from a running source. A natural running source. Now, it's basically water that has movement. So, what counts as living water? Well, not a well. Okay, wells are not living water. Rivers. Rivers are considered to be living water. Springs. Springs are actually probably the most important source of living water. Okay. It is just one of those things that it's considered to be a great source of water. It's clean, it's pure, it's pleasant to drink. So springs and rivers. Those are your two primary sources of living water. Technically, lakes and freshwater seas can be considered living water, and the reason why is they have a tide. Okay, so that can also be considered living water. So springs, in order of most living to least: springs, rivers, lakes. Okay. Now, what's not considered living water? Wells. Wells have a lot of mineral content. Taste is kind of off, and it doesn't move. Okay. The other thing that doesn't count is cisterns. Cisterns are slimy. They're nasty to drink. Basically, a cistern is a natural or man-made cavern that has been sealed with quicklime to sort of hold in the water. It tends to have a lot of calcium in it. It tends to have a lot of algae in it and dirt. Kind of nasty. So those are not considered to be living waters. So wells and cisterns are not living water. So that's what it means by living water and generally English translations will translate this as running water. But the original Hebrew text will say living water. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, the question. It wasn't a super chat, but thank you for the question. It's a very interesting question, and we really appreciate it. Okay, I've got another super chat come in here. Let's find it. From BC for $2 Australian. Thank you for the super chat. Sponsoring question from Fulvinson on iconoclasts. Okay. All right, it's going to be previous to that, so let's see. Fulvinson. Okay, he's referred to it in 47. I've not found the question yet. If you could repost that question, that might save us some time searching. So we are looking here for Fulvinson's question. Okay, on iconoclasts. I'm not finding it. About when did you post it? That might help us find it. Oh, yeah, that's true. Okay, I see it. He reposted. Okay, so awesome. Thank you for reposting that. Okay, so as soon as it comes up, here we go. All right. All right, here's the question. What impact have iconoclasts had on our understanding of history due to the destruction of artifacts? Not much, to be honest. The fact is that icons were never a great source of history. They were more a source of hagiography. Okay, now, there is a historical aspect to hagiography. However, icons tend to don't preserve a lot of historical detail. They tend to be adapted to the cultures in which they're made. Okay. So, for example, you look at icons that are basically made from, say, the Syrian Church, Syrian Orthodox Church, they tend to be more Semitic in appearance. So they tend to be darker skinned, black hair, very, as I said, very Semitic looking. Okay. But you go look at, say, icons from, say, Eastern European churches, okay, like Eastern Orthodoxy, Russian Orthodoxy, even Ukrainian Orthodoxy. And what you see is saints that look like Eastern Europeans. So the apostles might have blonde hair and white skin. Okay, not looking Semitic in the slightest. Okay? So a lot of icons are adapted to local cultures. So there is a lot of cultural adaptation for icons. So when we look at, say, what iconoclasm did, it was really the iconoclasts destroyed icons. And again, this is born out of the iconoclast controversy of the 7th through 9th centuries. So it didn't really affect our historical understanding in any way. And that's because icons themselves are not, while they preserve local art styles, so many of these were made that we have lots of examples. A lot of examples. So the only historical understanding we could possibly get out of, say icons is art history. That's what we would get. That's the understanding we would get. Is art history. That's really where we would get any sort of historical thing. Now, with that said, so many of these survived that iconoclasm really didn't seriously impact our understanding of art styles of early icons. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much to BC who sponsored this question. We really appreciate when people in the community sponsor other people's questions. We thank you so much. We thank you for the support of the channel, and we hope that question helped. Okay. So let's see, take some more non-super chats here. Okay, I'll take this one from Danny Dement. What is your position on cessationism versus continuationism, re the gifts of the Spirit, tongues, healings? I am a continuationist. Very much so. I'm not a Pentecostal, but I am. I do believe in the perpetuity of spiritual gifts. Okay. Yeah, some of them are. Yeah, some of them are things such as hospitality, discernment, organization. There are a wide variety of spiritual gifts that are still necessary and needed in the church today. I mean, discernment, that's a spiritual gift. Boy, does the church need that one right now? Whoa! If we had more discernment, and discernment is the one spiritual gift that anyone can have. One of the interesting things about spiritual gifts is normally, it says, do all people speak in tongues? In I think it's 1 Corinthians, and the answer is no. Do all prophesy? No. Are all teachers? No. And so on. But discernment is the one spiritual gift anybody can have. Some more and some less, but if we had that spiritual gift in the church, we'd be in a lot better state than we are today. Yeah, BC, anyone can have it, but nobody does. Yeah, BC, because no one asks for it. I mean, frankly, nobody asks for that gift. It's just, you're not just going to get it on your own. I mean, you might. There's some people who do get it on just by natural means, but common sense isn't used. My producer just said. What, you want common sense in the church? Are you kidding me? What next are you going to ask for? Holiness? Righteousness?
Any discernment in your church.
Yeah. Yeah, we might have some issues in the church right now, just saying. Yeah, you're right, Danny. I mean, he says the people who want gifts tend to want the flashy ones. I find, yeah, they pretty much, yeah, most people want either speaking in tongues or prophecy. And most of them don't understand either, honestly. Whoa. Yikes. Okay, so yeah, I think if we had a little more discernment, a little more wisdom, more teaching in the church, those are spiritual gifts that the church can really benefit from. Now, I want to say one other thing about spiritual gifts before we move on, which is it's part of the mysterion. Now, for those who don't know, the mysterion is a term that Paul uses to explain the relationship of the parts of the body of Christ to the wholeness of the body of Christ. Okay? And, Paul basically says, okay, the body of Christ has many parts, but it acts as one body with Christ as its head. That's the mysterion. But what makes the parts act as a whole is the Holy Spirit expressing himself through spiritual gifts between the parts. I had a professor, Grant Osborne, that basically, he had to fix some broken churches. And he would ask, okay, what percentage of people in your congregation are using the spiritual gifts for the church? And, he might get an answer like, 20%. Then he would ask the question, what would happen if only 20% of the cells in your body were functioning? Yeah, this is called chronic organ failure. This is not a good thing. We have a church today that's not functioning like the church. Yeah, empty desk. I think you'd be dead. You'd be dead. Yeah, there's no think about it. You'd be dead. I mean, really. This is what we have right now is we have a mysterion where the members of the body aren't functioning. They aren't functioning. They're not using their spiritual gifts for the body of Christ. And because they're not using the functions that God gave them for the body of Christ, the church is dying and dead. It's not functioning as the church. So we have some serious problems in the church that is caused by the failure to use the gifts of the Spirit for the purposes of the kingdom and for the church and for the body of Christ. So this is a serious problem, and it's a systemic problem. So, I always say, when we bring up the whole topic of spiritual gifts, are they being used in your church? Are they being used for God's glory? And how many people are using it? If the majority of your parishioners are not using their spiritual gifts for the glory of God, your church has a problem. And it needs to be fixed. Yeah. Who's exercising in your church the gifts of hospitality? Who, as my producer just brought up here, who's exercising the gift of discernment? Who's exercising the gift of wisdom? Who's exercising the gift of wisdom?
That's rarer than discernment.
That's rarer than discernment. Wisdom? What are you talking about, man? That's crazy talk. Who's exercising the gift of prophecy? Now, when we talk about prophecy, we got to remember 90% of prophecy is not foretelling, it's forthtelling. What forthtelling is, as opposed to foretelling is foretelling the future. Forthtelling is basically telling people the way things are right now, explaining what's happening in the current situation at that moment. Okay? 90% of prophecy is explaining the now. My favorite viewer. I eat McDonald's multiple times a week. I clearly don't have the gift of discernment. Probably not. But I am prophetically seeing diabetes in your future. Whoa. Yeah. So, you can do a lot of, exercising the spiritual gifts in ways that can be accommodated in any denomination. Any denomination. But if you want a healthy church, you need those exercise of spiritual gifts. You do need them. And not every gift is going to manifest in every church, and I don't think there's even any expectation for that. But, you do need that happening. So, anyway, thank you very much for that question. I hope that helped. Okay, let's take some more non-super chats here. Okay, that's a good question. It hasn't come up yet, so we'll just wait a half a second here and. Okay. BC asks, does the lack of desire for lesser gifts hamper manifestation of the higher gifts? The problem is there's really no such thing as higher or lower gifts. All are done in the service for Christ. Is the hand higher than the foot? Is the spleen higher than the heart? Yes, but but that's a spleen. Okay, but if you didn't have the liver, you'd be in serious trouble. If you didn't have a hand, you'd be incomplete. You'd be handicapped. Be disabled. There are every part of the body is needed. That's why it's created as the body. And likewise, every gift has its function. So, I don't think that the lack of desire for lesser gifts hampers the manifestation of higher gifts. But at the same time, too, not everyone has every gift. You can't desire to have, say, the gift of prophecy. This is something that's given at the discretion. These gifts are given at the discretion of the Holy Spirit. You can't will them to manifest. I think, okay, I'll take the follow-up here. I guess what I mean is, does the fact the church doesn't care for some gifts, are they denied others? That is usually not a problem. It's usually more along the lines of they don't want any gifts at all. Now, of course, the big exception here is probably going to be Pentecostalism, where, say, the gift of tongues is the be-all and the end-all. Like in Pentecostal churches, if you don't speak in tongues, you're not considered a Christian. Now, a lot of Pentecostal denominations have walked that one back, But there's still Pentecostal churches out there, many of them, that still think if you don't speak in tongues, that you aren't a Christian. So, you're tailoring a church then around one specific gift. And if you tailor a church around one specific gift, yeah, you're probably going to drive out people with other gifts. So it's not that they're going to be denied to the church, but that church is going to just make it less comfortable for them to be there. So in a sense, that desire for the one gift is going to end up being a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's the Pygmalion effect. You desire the gift of tongues in your church? Yeah, that might be all you get. Not because God didn't supply other gifts, because you drove the others out and invited people with tongues in. So, yeah, it's going to be an issue. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, we'll go back to non-superchats here. Again, I'm looking for that Q and colon. Okay, I'll take this one from Let Me Explain the Shepherd. Could you explain the idea of archetypes? Sure. We're talking here about typology, okay? Specifically, how Jonah was an archetype of Jesus and how an ancient Jew would have read the passages about Jonah then Jesus. Okay. Now, when we talk about typology, archetype is the original type. You can have, and this goes to sort of, how do I say this? Literary theory, okay? It's literary theory. You have, say, a type of one thing. Like, for example, you look at King David. He's a type of king. He's a type of king. And he's maybe the ideal king of Israel. He's not the first king of Israel, but he's the ideal king of Israel. So he's the archetype. He's the ideal. He's the first type. That's what we mean by archetype. The first type. Then we have Solomon, who's another type of king. Okay? He's also a type of king. And then you get other kings, some good, some bad. Each one is a particular type of king. And all of those types of kings are foreshadowing Jesus as King of the Jews. Now, when an archetype and types they're a kind of physical prophecy. They're a kind of physical prophecy. It's a prophecy by event or person, and it's foreshadowing the future. And when it is fulfilled in Jesus Christ, Jesus then is the antitype. That's the fulfillment of a type. Okay? So that's the idea of types in a nutshell. Typology. You start with the archetype. You have maybe more types along the way. And then it is consummated. This physical prophecy is consummated with the antitype. Okay? So, when we talk about Jonah's interesting because he's sort of a one-of-a-kind archetype. The archetype that's being shown here with Jonah is Jonah goes into the belly of the fish and he dies. He's dead. Dead. I have to say that repeatedly because people just, for some reason, they refuse to believe that Jonah died in the belly of a whale. Maybe it's David C. Cook Sunday school materials, but they see Jonah with a, in the belly of the whale with a table and a chair and an oil lamp in there, and he's writing his memoirs. No, Jonah's dead in the whale. And he's dead for days. And on the third day, Jonah spit out and he raises to life. He's alive again. Okay? He's raised to life again. Okay? So that's the archetype of being dead in the belly of the whale in Sheol, the grave. And on the third day, rising again from the dead. So Jonah here is the archetype of resurrection. He's the archetype of death, descent into the grave, into Sheol, and to resurrection from the dead. Jesus is the antitype. So that's the relationship here. Jonah is the archetype. Jesus is the antitype of death, Sheol, and the resurrection on the third day. Jamie Russell says, I blame Pinocchio. Francis Dog says, I think it's a Veggie Tales that screwed up my view. There's a lot of blame to be spread around here. I don't know why. I don't know why Sunday school materials and popular culture within the church have such an aversion to Jonah being dead. You know, we do find resurrection in the scriptures, and it's not just Jonah. You know, there's the son of the widow, you know, who dies, and I think it's the prophet Elijah that raises him from the dead. You know, it's something that just, you know, for some reason, Western Christianity just can't wrap its head around that Jonah was dead. But the text, especially in Jonah chapter 2, is really clear about this.
Dies.
Yeah. As my producer points out, you know, Paul resurrects the kid that falls asleep in the window. Yeah, he shouldn't have slept in service. It falls out the window, breaks his neck, and dies. You know, Paul raises him back to life. You know, there is, but in this particular case, for example, as I said, as far as Jonah's concerned, we have a real problem in the West, you know, seeing this as death. We just don't see it. We read Jonah and we just don't, it doesn't register with us. Whereas, say, somebody in the first century would have known this. Jonah is the classic tale of death, the grave, and resurrection. And a lot, like, for example, when Christ says to the Israelites, you know, you ask for a sign, I'm going to give you no sign but the sign of Jonah. He's predicting his own death, his own descent to Sheol, and his own resurrection from the dead on the third day. That's the sign. That's what, you know, Jesus says, a wicked generation seeks a sign. But here's the sign I will give you. He's going to pull a Jonah. He's the antitype to Jonah's archetype. So anyway, I hope that helped explain it. Thank you very much for that question. It's a great question, and I hope that helped. All right, gonna look for more non-super chats here. We're at 11:20. I'll take one or two more, and then I'm gonna call it a night because I can. Okay, I'll take my favorite viewer here. Do you have any objections to theistic evolution? Yes. If so, what exactly do you disagree with? Okay, let me put it this way. I don't have a horse in this race. I don't subscribe to any view on origins. I'm not a young Earth creationist. I'm not an old Earth creationist. I'm not a middle creationist. I'm not a progressive creationist. I'm not a theistic evolutionist. I'm not a secular evolutionist. I don't believe in panspermia. I have no horse in this race. None. I stay out of this race. Okay? And why? Because I think there's problems with all of it. I think there's problems with all of it. Now, my first problem with it, and this is not strictly applies to theistic evolution, it applies to other things too, like old Earth creationism and young Earth creationism. I think theistic evolutionism relies on a concordant view of Genesis. The idea that you have to make Genesis fit a scientific paradigm. Genesis is not a scientific book. It's a religious book. It's meant to recapitulate temple ideology. You can't turn that into concordant scientism. It just doesn't work. So that's the first problem I have with theistic evolution, is that it's misreading the scriptures. But it's not alone in this regard. In some ways, theistic evolution combines the worst of all possible worlds. I don't necessarily agree with secular evolution. I think there are some scientific issues with it. I think there are some religious issues with the theistic aspect of theistic evolution. So, and we already broached one, which is the concordant issue. So I think that's a problem. But I think there's also some problems with the scientific end of this too. There is a large part of evolution is still a theory in incredible flux. If you look at, say, the history of evolutionary theory, it changes roughly every 25 to 30 years. And it changes in radical ways. We're now in what I would call fourth wave evolutionary theory. You have the first wave, which was Darwinian evolution, and it's the idea that species picked up traits over time that were selected out using natural selection. Okay. Now, obviously that's not true because traits are determined at birth by genetics. So that gave way, genetic theory, forced evolution to give way to, say, second wave of evolution, basically what's called neo-Darwinism. Neo-Darwinism stated, and this was by Julian Huxley, that you have this genetics which has traits, and those traits produce the characteristics through genetics that then get selected out by natural selection. So you don't pick up the traits during your life. You have them at birth, but they get selected out by natural selection. Okay. Now, then you get paleontology getting into the act, and they look at speciation. And they discover that, well, that gradualism that Darwin said, maybe not so true. Maybe we have, what we see in the fossil records is species extant over long periods of time. Tyrannosaurus rex, ruled for something like 30 million years. Okay, it was stable over time. Yes, there's subspecies, but generally these subspecies and species are stable. Okay, so gradualism, it doesn't work. You can throw that out of evolutionary theory. This became replaced by Niall Gould and Eldridge's theory of punctuated equilibrium. Now we have third wave evolutionary theory. Okay, so it's different again. Now we're up into what's called fourth wave, or the epigenetic view of evolution, where, okay, yeah, you're born with certain traits, but those traits are flexible. Those traits can be adaptable to an environment based upon biological mechanism. Okay, now how does this work? It's different again from the three previous forms of evolution. So evolution is always going through this constant process of revision. Now, I'm not willing to hang my hat on something that's going through this sort of fits and throes of change. Okay? Now, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But I want to see the dust clear a little bit before I actually, put my hat on the ring on this one. So in many respects, theistic evolution combines the worst of both worlds. So I'm not gonna be a theistic evolutionist anytime soon. But then again, I'm also not gonna be a young Earth creationist anytime soon, or a secular evolutionist anytime soon. Staying out of this, because it's just there's just too many open questions still. I'm not comfortable with it. I'm not comfortable with the speculative aspects of it. And I'm not comfortable with the theological interpretations that get you there. So, again, so that's my, yeah, I'm gonna take that comment. Yeah, let me explain. It's a real mess. It really is a mess. Yeah, it is really a mess. Yeah, our thinking on origins is still very much a mess. So, I am actually more comfortable with eschatology than I am with origins on this, because we've got a lot clearer statements on eschatology than we do in origins. So I'm staying out of this one. Okay. At the moment, well, yeah, when the evidence comes clear, I'll go back in. Now, I do think that there are some interesting and important things in origins that should be discussed, that never get discussed. Okay? In fact, I've been tempted to do a book on Genesis, including the origins debate, because I think some of the higher questions of origins have been subverted by concordant views. Concordant views, I think there's some deeper theological questions that people are just not getting to. Like, for example, what is the state of pre-existent matter? I say basically matter that was there before, say, ex nihilo creation had to take place at some point. Okay, ex nihilo, it may not be described in Genesis 1, and in fact, it probably wasn't described in Genesis 1, but it had to take place in some point. Philosophically, we know this from New Testament revelation. Okay? But there's a moral aspect of that creation that never gets addressed. For example, in Genesis 1, it talks about creation being good. It talks about, separating the water. It's good. Created the lights. It's good. Separate the waters from the waters. It's good. All that's good. Creation of life. It's good. What about that pre-existent matter? Is that good? Or is that audiophron? Nobody asked that question. One of the most important questions to origins that never gets asked. Never gets asked. And why doesn't it get asked? Because everyone is obsessed with trying to tie Genesis 1 to science. So there's a lot of really, really important philosophical questions to ask about origins that we're just missing. We're just missing because we're not thinking along those lines. Because we've been subverted by other matters that really don't count towards our ideas of God, of morality, of creation, of the supremacy of Trinity. I mean, you start talking Trinity and creation, and things get interesting fast. But no one's asking those questions. Again, that's why I wanted to write a book on origins. In fact, I think I was going to do the title "Higher Questions on Creation." That was going to be the title of the book. Because we're not asking the questions, and because we're not asking the questions, we're not even addressing the issues or even broaching the answers. So anyway, that's my thought on origins and theistic evolution. I hope that helped. Very much appreciate the question. I think it's yeah. Oh boy. Take that comment as soon as it comes up here. What? Oh yeah. I actually have a book start for that. I had worked on that for a while. Let me explain. Follows the Shepherd says, such a great title, gotta do it. Well, oh boy. On my copious list of book projects I want to do, the reason has not been done, I don't have the time. This is why we're really trying to push towards going full time. Because we know these are books that the church needs because no one has done them. And I am constantly frustrated at my lack of time to devote to this. So yeah, this is why we're so appreciative of the people who donate to this channel, because you're getting us closer to being able to write books again. And I really, really want to write books. Yeah, and it's on a list. We've got a huge list of books we want to write. As I said, we want to do one on the Exodus. We want to do one on archaeological fallacies. We want to do one on chronology. We want to do this one on higher questions on creation. We got a list of books we really, really want to do because these are books no one has done. One of the things I want to say about writing books too is we've even considered doing a commentary on Exodus in its Egyptian context. Okay? Now, one of the things I think is, I mean, I'm not going to do a bunch of commentaries, okay? Just to be blunt, because too many people are doing commentaries already. But I think that's a lacuna. A lacuna is basically a hole in the literature that no one's done. We want to write books that no one has done. You know, we're not gonna reinvent the wheel. That's not what we do. You know, it's not a good use of my time. It's not a good use of my time to do books people have done over and over and over again. I want to do books that nobody have done. So, this is why we throw out the titles too, is we know nobody can do them. So yeah. Jack Ray, a commentary on commentaries like a coffee table book about coffee tables. Now there is 2 books that actually fit that bill, believe it or not. There was a guide to commentaries, an Old Testament and a New Testament edition. The New Testament edition was written by D.A. Carson. The Old Testament edition was done by Trimper Lungman III. And both are basically a guide to commentaries, the best commentaries for various books of the Bible. And they each in each listing, it talks about the pluses, the minuses, why you might choose one commentary over the other for a particular book. I mean, it's a very good set of books, and I would recommend it. So, a commentary on commentaries does exist. Okay, so we're not going to do that one. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciate it, and on theistic evolution, and I hope that helps. Oh, somebody wants to know what the barcode on the back of the cup is. Okay, this is our Scarab mug that has our logo on the front. The barcode on the back is to the YouTube channel, Ancient Egypt and the Bible. So basically, if you have this at work and people want to see this, and they'll see the barcode sitting on your desk and scan it, they'll get Ancient Egypt and the Bible. So that's what the barcode is. Fill up the camera there. You might even be able to scan that on the barcode there. So that's what the barcode is on the cup. It's the address to Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Yeah, it was a pretty cool idea. Let me explain. Yeah, it is stealth marketing. The other mug we have is just a Mr. Empty Conjecture mug, but that one doesn't have a barcode. But this one, our logo mug, has a barcode. So, yeah, it is stealth marketing. So yeah, it's no, Mr. Empty Conjecture does not have a barcode on it. It has a smaller version of the channel logo on the back. Okay, and also has a saying on the back: "Discern truth from what could be." So yeah, that's pretty fun. We love the mugs. I love the mugs. The mugs are fantastic. Okay, Jack Ray with the 3 sock puppets. Oh, Mr. Empty Conjecture. You scamp. Okay, we're going to take one more non-super chat and we're going to call it a night. So I'm going to take one more. It'll be the last non-super chat, and then that will be it. Mr. Historical Strategy Gaming, Mr. EC tattoos, laugh out loud like those little kids get that wash off. Yeah,
Oh, that'd be so much.
Oh yeah, that'd be so much fun at ETS having those. I am just afraid though that someone might get those permanently done. Uh, Paul Thompson, can you answer my super chat too? Did we miss a super chat? Just restate the question, Paul, and we'll get to it. So just restate the question because I don't see your super chat. Oh, I should tell people again that if we did miss your super chat sometimes in the last couple days. Oh, Egypt's sons. Okay, I think I know of it.
It's around.
Okay, got it. All right. Paul Thompson for 199. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We did forget about it. What happened to the sons of Egypt in Genesis 10:13 to 14? Okay. One of the things we've got to keep in mind with Genesis 10 is this is an ethnographic, it's not a genealogy. It's an ethnographic, how do I say this? Set of origins. It's not meant to be literal. Okay? So, Sons of Genesis 10 to 13. Okay. Sorry, 13 to 14. Okay. So what it's trying to do is trying to spiritualize the descent of mankind. It's not a genetic descent, it's a spiritual descent. So it says here in Genesis 10, verse 13, and Mitzrayim became father of Ludim and Anamim, Lehabim and Nathuhim. These are Greek isles, by the way. Pathrusim, that's Upper Egypt. Kalushim, from which came the Philistines, Greece, and Caphtorim, Crete. Okay? So, here's what the text is really driving at. And it goes on. And the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgashite, and the Hivite, and the Archite, and the Sinite, and the Artivite, and the Zemarite, and the Hamathite, and afterwards the families of the Canaanites were spread abroad. So essentially what Genesis 10 here is trying to show is that the Canaanites are the spiritual descendants of the Egyptians, which is what Mitzrayim is. Mitzrayim is Egypt. And it's in the dual. Okay. So it's spiritualizing these descents. However, we know that the Egyptians are not related to the Amorites, not physically. They're not related to the sea peoples. So they're not related to the Kashluhim or the Kaftorim or the Naphtuhim, okay, or the Lidim. So basically, it's trying to take both the Philistine sea peoples and the Amorites and the Canaanites and sort of lump them under a spiritual umbrella of being, say, spiritually like Egyptians. So that's what Genesis 10 here is driving at. Not physical descent, spiritual descent. There is a difference. And that's probably one of the hardest things that people have when they start looking at Genesis 10 is they try to figure it out genetically. A line of descent of nations. Because it's you'll see often in Bibles they'll just call this the Table of Nations. That's not a biblical text. That's a theological title of this text. But it's not really a Table of Nations. It's a spiritual, ethnographic categorization of nations. So the Israelites are categorizing these people according to their attitudes and their beliefs. Yeah, Danny Dement has it right. Spiritual successors as it were. That's exactly what's going on here. That I'll put that here. Here. It's not quite up yet, but there we go. Spiritual successors as it were. Absolutely. That's exactly what's going on here. That's exactly what we're finding in Genesis 10. These nations are spiritual successors to their parent nations. Empty disc. It's more a table of football team fans. Yeah, Yeah, more or less. Yeah, that that's closer. That's closer. Yeah. So yeah, some people will try. I mean, I found that there's exegetes today that still try to make. Now you don't find this in, say, critical commentaries, but you do see this among, say, fundamentalists still, where they try to show this as being a physical descent, a genetic descent of these people, and you know it doesn't work. It just doesn't work because it's not meant to be taken that way. These are spiritual successors, not physical successors. And they are not physically related. So anyway, that's what's going on with the Table of Nations. Some of these nations go extinct. Some of them carry on and are, have descendants that survive to the modern time. So, it's going to depend on a case by case basis here. Like, the Hivites, they are the remnants of the Mitanni. They're the remnants of the Mitanni. And they're not going to survive ultimately. The same can be said for the Jebusites. The Jebusites, become integrated. Those few that survive become integrated into Israelite culture and just disappear. So that's it's going to depend on a case by case basis, but some survive, some don't. So anyway, that's what sort of happened to them, and that's what's going on in the passage here. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And sorry we sort of overlooked it. We didn't mean to do that, but sometimes it happens. We do need reminders sometimes. So we thank you for reminding us. We thank you for the super chat. We really appreciate it. And I hope that helped. Okay, I'm going to take one more non-super chat, and then we're going to call it a night here. I'll try to take one higher up on the maybe next week on that one. Okay, I'll take this one. It's a language question, and we started with a language question. We're going to end with a language question because I love language questions. Let me explain. Followers of the Shepherd asks, how did the language Aramaic form? Great question. Essentially, it started with the breakup of the Mitanni Empire. Okay? So, what you had in the towards the end of, say, the 13th century, the breakup of the Mitanni Empire, okay? During, say, the reign of King I, in that 14th century era, Supiluma I, the Hittite emperor, annexed the Mitanni. And that's because the Mitanni were being invaded by the Assyrians. Okay? So instead of being invaded, the Mitanni surrendered to the Hittites. The Hittites replaced the king of Mitanni with one of the sons of Supiluma I. And at that point, the Mitanni became a vassal state for the Hittites. Okay. So that's sort of the beginning of the end of the Mitanni. Now, they are survived as a vassal state for a while. But what happens is it doesn't last very long. The Hittites cannot offer much protection to the Mitanni because the Hittite Empire itself was falling apart. And by around 1180 BC, the Mitanni Empire, the Hittite Empire itself has fallen apart. And what this does to the old Mitanni vassal state is it causes it to break up into a bunch of smaller states. And these became the post-Mitanni or Aramean states. Eventually, you had a bunch of city-states that now formed the Aramean collective. These states started, and this is the origins of the Aramaic language. Aramaic is going to start taking that Semitic language that is sort of a descendant of Eastern Semitic dialects. So they're going to take bits of Amorite, Akkadian, maybe some local Canaanite dialects, and they're going to cobble that together in the 9th century BC into Aramaic. And that language is going to be enormously popular. Eventually, those collective of Aramean states will form the Kingdom of Aram. And it's from Aram that we get Aramaic. Okay? So, those are the beginnings of the Aramaic language. And it becomes eventually the lingua franca of the ancient Near East. So it proves to be an enormously popular language. There's even a point in, say, during the divided monarchy of Israel, that the general public no longer speaks Hebrew, but Aramaic. So, that happens towards the end of the divided monarchy, when Sennacherib invades. When Sennacherib invades and he has his siege of Jerusalem and Hezekiah, his emissary, Sennacherib's emissary, is speaking in Hebrew to the people of Jerusalem, and they call down from the ramparts, "Hey, we don't speak Hebrew, we speak Aramaic. Speak in the common tongue." So that's you're talking to there in the 8th century. So already by the 8th century, the Aramaic has already had incredible traction in the ancient Near East. So it becomes the language of diplomacy, of commerce, and in most ways it supersedes its original languages. Long after, say, Akkadian dies. Akkadian dies around 500 BC. Aramaic is still spoken. And during New Testament times, it starts taking on new forms, such as Syriac. Syriac is essentially a New Testament form of Aramaic. So it's a wildly successful language, and to be honest, it's still spoken today. It never really died out. So there's it's an incredibly popular language in its time, and it had great survivability. Hebrew died twice as a language. And even though that happened, Aramaic was still going strong. Takes a licking, but keeps on ticking. That's Aramaic. Okay, so that's going to be our final non-super chat for the night. We want to thank everybody who joined us tonight. We want to thank all the super chatters who have donated so generously to the channel, and those who have given us extra gifts through PayPal. We really appreciate the gifts through PayPal, since those are gifts, and for us they are tax-free. So we really appreciate the gifts through PayPal. And if you want to donate through PayPal, the link is in the description. So we want to thank all those super chatters and those donors who are really helping us get along. We so appreciate it. We want to thank our Patreon supporters who have been so generous to us and ask very little in return. We also want to thank our new members here on YouTube, because that also is contributing to the channel as well. And finally, we want to thank our regular subscribers who comment, who like our videos, and who post links to our videos on other social media platforms, because that exposes new audiences to our content. We really appreciate that, because that for us means extra growth. So with that said, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. It was a great night. We really appreciate it. And we will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.